The Runesmith. Chapter 151 Fired. That's it, bring it over here. All right. The shuffling of feet was heard along with the shouts of grown men. About 10 workers were moving various construction materials consisting mostly of red bricks. Roland was to the side looking at the people that he had hired for the construction of his own store. At first, he was thinking about building a wooden building from simple logs and planks. Then after discussing it with Bernier he went for a more stable solution. A building from bricks was a lot sturdier and could be reinforced from the inside with some runic magic. While the bricks could not be inscribed with runes directly, there were other methods that other various magical stores used. The easiest way as always would be to line the place with thin metal and inscribe runes on it. He could also use runic scrolls, and then there would be the third method where a person could use special magical paint. This paint would be able to hold a runic charge for a bit but was a lot more costly than a regular runic scroll. Before he came up with the defensive measures of this store, there were other things that he needed to worry about. The first one was to actually build it and then fill it up with his wares. While the technology in this world was far below his old one, the building process was actually quite speedy. With the help of various skills and magic to help the craftsmen, everything went smooth. The high-level carpenters would not need things like measuring tapes nor indicators to tell them if they were cutting in the right spot. They could tell if what they were doing was equally placed with just a glance. Thus the process of laying bricks and cutting them was increased several-fold. The alchemical equivalents of cement and plaster were also here. They were actually better than their modern counterparts as they dried faster and didn't require things like heavy concrete mixers to bind. This was all thanks to the field of earth magic, which allowed these builders to use specialized techniques. They had a certain magical tool that would cause the bonding mixture to harden when it was used. This tool used mana fluid to run, and the one that these men were using had runic inscriptions. Roland was quick to scribble down the runic patterns and components for future use. He knew that he was stealing costly company secrets in doing this, but it would allow him to fix things around here without the help of the construction company if anything ever broke. He still needed the alchemical mixture to pair with it, so the newly gained tool might not even be usable. Mr. Wayland. While thinking about the new shop, he noticed a familiar person call out to him. It was a human youth of about 18 years. The young man had blonde hair that was styled into a bob and had quite the blue eyes. Klaus? Isn't the shipment of runic items due in a week? Yes sir, I didn't come for that, the guild sent me to deliver this letter to you. He was handed a letter that had a seal on it. With one look he knew that it was a special seal that if not removed correctly would cause the letter to go up in flames. After the item was given, Klaus nodded at Roland and made his way out of there. His eyes were clearly glued to the muscular construction workers that were bringing materials out of their spatial backpacks. Wasn't that Klaus? But we should still have a week. I know, he brought a letter over, can you look over the workers? Aye boss, I'll be sure to watch them like a hawk, if they try to steal something Agni will bite their dicks off. Roland looked to Agni that gave out a happy bark. Please stop teaching him strange things. Roland shook his head and returned to his room. There he used a simple technique on the letter to dissolve the seal. These types of letters could be attuned to a person's mana fingerprint. Such a fingerprint was given to the guild as he was signing the contract with them. Through it, they could keep in contact through these types of sealed letters. Why they decided to contact him in such a way was somewhat odd. This meant that something had happened. Greeting Wayland, we need to talk about something, so come to the guild today at sundown. Roland narrowed his eyes while looking at the piece of paper. He examined the back to see if there was something else, but he couldn't detect anything. Did he have to use such an elaborate thing to contact me? It was strange for the guild master to go out of his way to present him with a letter like this. He could have easily told the delivery boy to tell him. What was this secrecy for? He didn't know, but after reading the letter the magical ink on it turned red and it burst up in flames before him. That guild master has always had a screw loose. While Roland didn't want to go, he was obliged to visit the guild and talk with the guild master. He was still a tier 3 class holder and a person that was backing him. Thanks to the guild standing behind him, he had a convenient shield that protected him from outside forces. The interactions that he had with him were a bit peculiar. He could never really figure out what the man wanted, as sometimes he acted very relaxed but on other occasions he had violent outbursts to reel everyone in. Still, he was someone in a higher position in this city and in the guild through which he was making most of his money. Thus he waited for the construction workers to be done for the day before heading into the city. The day was kind of murky and the clouds indicated that soon it would be raining. He was lucky enough to make it into the guild before it started raining. The guild was filled to the brim with shouting men and women as always. While in the beginning, he disliked these types of displays, with time Roland had grown accustomed to it. He much preferred these sort of rowdy individuals to the nobles. The adventurer types laid out their emotions before themselves, while the nobles were more reserved and scheming. The latter were hard to read and a person had to always worry about what they were saying. Offending a noble could be the end of a person's long career, while on the other hand, the adventurers preferred to let their fists do the talking. He sometimes saw two men going at it over some silly dispute to only be drinking buddies the next day after knocking each other's teeth out. Luckily in this world healing magic extended to teeth, and thus people could let loose their pent-up aggression without things holding them back. Even the adventurers that he took out his rage on, had their bones healed up within a day's time. Afternoon, Mr. Wayland. You'll have to wait a moment as the guild master is busy with a previous engagement. Roland was greeted by Lydia, who was as professional as ever. Without Armand and Lobelia being there, she did not really have anyone to rage at. That's fine, I'll just wait inside. The guild was already known to him and he was under a contract. Thanks to this he could use some of the inside rooms without being kicked out. Thus he went inside and the loud noises of the adventurers were left behind as he decided to sit out in the corridor. There he could just wait till the people that were talking with the guild master went out and know when he could enter. This didn't take that long as he could hear some movement at the staircase. The people that came out weren't anyone that he knew, but he could feel a somewhat extensive mana signature from one of the people. This was quite odd as the person was a dwarf that weren't known for having lots of mana. There were two of them. Even without looking at their stats, Roland could tell that they were competent craftsmen. This didn't keep him from using his analyzing skill to try to figure out their identities. Seeing dwarves at the guild while their feud with him was underway was slightly alarming. Name: Boomer L122. Classes: T1 Mage L25, T1 Blacksmith L25, T1 Mana Scribe L25, T2 Enchantsmith 47. Name: Dunan L131. Classes: T1 Blacksmith L25, T1 Miner L25, T2 Armorsmith L50, T2 Weaponsmith 31. While the person called Dunan didn't really have any classes that were out of the ordinary, the other dwarf was different. This was the first time he laid his eyes on a proper enchantsmith, and this one was actually at quite the high level. The analyzing skill worked less on people that were above his level, so this was the most information he could get out of them. Luckily for him, they were not wearing any magical items that hid their classes from view. They would not be able to inspect him, which would make his Runesmith Lord class hidden. The Enchantasmith progression was very similar to the Runesmith progression. One became a Mana Scribe first, along with having to be a blacksmith and mage. Then the person had to learn specific skills during the Mana Scribe phase and enchant items as a blacksmith. Then the Tier 2 option would become available. Normally dwarves preferred to go with the Runesmith Tier 2 option as it was an all-around better class. There were some requirements from the base stats which put a wall that was not easily breached. With the high requirements, only about 1 from 4 people could actually achieve the Runesmith class. This made enchantsmiths a lot more prevalent around the world. It was also easier to learn and easier to progress without having much outside knowledge. Thus runesmiths were somewhat worshipped in the dwarven circles. But, while they loved their own runesmiths, they despised any other race that achieved this status without their approval. Their whole identity was based on crafting. When someone came around that could affect this, they mostly reacted in the way they were doing it now. Roland could feel the looks of the two dwarves on him. At first he thought they would start frowning and staring daggers, but instead, they seemed to be in a good mood. When they passed him he could have sworn that one of them gave out a chuckle. The two strutted outside while he stood up and headed up the stairs into the guildmaster's office. It was clear that the two dwarves that he passed belonged to the union in the city. It seemed that this strange visit that he was summoned to would be somewhat interesting. "It's me, Wayland." He knocked on the door and quickly heard the guildmaster's voice. "Come in." On the inside, he took up his usual spot and could notice that something was off. On the guildmaster's desk, there were some torn-up papers. At first, he wasn't sure, but then he quickly realized that what he was looking at was the contract that he had signed with the guild. The contract didn't really put much strain on the guild, they could fire him without losing much. This was all due to him receiving the knowledge required for the runic smelter he was using now. They would have to pay a small fee, but it didn't look like the guildmaster cared about that fact. "I see that you have given in to the union's demands," Wayland asked while standing up. It looked like this conversation wouldn't take long and he wasn't really interested in hearing some kind of long-winded explanations from this man. At this point in his life, he felt like he would be fine. The dwarves could try, but his skill set was far too rare to be halted by their little tricks. But, while he was somewhat sure that he could sell his wares, the problem of getting the right materials arose. Before he could think about that conundrum, the guildmaster called out to him. "This doesn't matter, just sit down and listen." Ordhan quickly shouted while tossing the torn-up contract to the side. "This is just meaningless paper, it's not how relations between people are built. This shit is just for people that lack integrity, and I don't think you are someone that lacks that." Roland sat back down, but the confusion from his face didn't vanish. The contract was torn apart and the guild was obviously cutting ties with him. What was with this strange talk of integrity? "You probably realized that the dwarves are a stubborn bunch. They would rather go bankrupt than let an outsider dabble in what they think is part of their traditions." Roland just nodded, as it seemed that the dwarves were a bunch that didn't think only in profits. There was more money to be made if they cooperated with him. If his wares were in their stores, more people would come to buy them, and they could even share their magical technology with each other. "I'm not really sure where you are going with this," Roland answered, as the guildmaster was kind of getting off topic. Time was money, so Roland didn't really want to listen to some bullshit explanation by this man that made his decision to cut ties just in some way. "I see that you are eager to go home and continue your work, but do you think it will be that easy?" "What do you mean? Do you think that your runic wares are enough to get you through this? Will it be that easy? Why wouldn't they? Even if you don't help me, I can still sell at the auction house." "At the auction house? Have you even tried to do that recently? You underestimate the union." Roland had to stop and think. Some time had passed since his last visit to the auction house. If the union had enough pull there, they would probably be able to ban him from selling there. That would only leave him with either peddling out in the streets or attracting people to his new store. "I'll be fine, I'll figure something out." "I'm sure you will, but what I'm trying to say is, that you don't have to." Roland perked up at the words, as the guildmaster for some reason wanted to continue their relationship. "You want to continue helping me under the union's nose?" "Something like that. Let me explain. Sit down, this could take a while." While he wasn't sure what to make of it, Roland decided to listen to the guildmaster's offer. Ordhan explained the reason for the termination first. The other craftsmen were having a hard time making a living, and it would be an uphill battle that devoured a lot of coin if they wanted to go against the union's deep coffers. He couldn't really blame the other craftsmen for thinking that he was the problem. Before he came along, everything was fine. He would also probably be able to survive even if the union was against him, but he would have to sell his wares less openly. This was also where this conversation seemed to be going. "You want me to do what?" "I'll have to sign a contract. This will keep me from giving you aid openly, but there are other ways of earning money." Ordhan gave a devilish grin as he just gave Roland a somewhat unethical proposition. "Before I sign it, I can get you in touch with some of my contacts. through them you will be able to purchase what you need and most importantly sell. The talk was about the black market. It was a whole different entity than what the Dwarven Union and the merchants were running. It was something hidden, and if there was something you could offer, they would take it. Why are you doing this? You could easily wipe your sleeve clean of all of this and be done with it. Why go against the dwarves like this? He asked as he wasn't sure if he could trust this man. What if these contacts that he was talking about were some plot to get him in trouble with the law? The black market was the black market for a reason. If the ruling power in the area caught him, he would be in a heap of trouble. Why go against them? Because I am greedy. Ordhan spoke up with pride as if there was nothing wrong with that statement. I don't like when things are taken from me. I would enjoy nothing more than to see those shitty dwarves eat shit. I also know a good investment when I see one. You have a bright future ahead of you, but it's not going to be easy. Roland wasn't really sure where this trust came from, but this deal gave him a way out of this mess. He knew what Ordhan was going for here. He wanted to still keep him on good terms while appeasing the Dwarven Union. The old man was clearly trying to play on two fronts. If he would take his side if this all came out remained to be seen. So what will it be? Wayland, we don't have much time. After I sign the contract my hands will be tied. Roland looked at the guildmaster's large hand that he was holding out towards him. It was clear that this would only be an agreement between two men. It would depend on their character if there weren't any ulterior motives. Thus a big decision needed to be made. Would he cut his ties with the guild and try to do everything on his own? Or would he try using Ordhan's contacts to soften the blow from losing his suppliers? Chapter 152 Shady Business. A loud sound of a door getting slammed could be heard. This loud thud was followed by the rumbling of footsteps that were coming down the stairs. Mr. Wayland, is everything okay? Elydia, that was about to head over to the guildmaster's office, was the first to notice to whom these loud footsteps belonged to. She could see a rather mad-looking young man rushing down the stairs. Ms. Elydia. He stopped for a moment to look at her, but then just as quickly decided to move past. It was clear to her that he was in no mood to talk. Everything is fine, you don't need to concern yourself with me. Before she could figure out what this was all about, Wayland stormed out of the guild. She was left to wonder about the look on his face. The young runesmith had a somewhat grumpy expression devoid of a smile by default, but this one was a bit more serious. She moved up the stairs to the guildmaster's office as she was tasked to bring over some papers. It seemed that Ordhan wanted her to write up a contract and bring it over to one of the scribes for magical imprinting. While she could write up the proper papers in a legally binding way, she didn't have the proper class to create a magical contract. Guildmaster. Elydia. Just come in and lock the door behind you. She entered the office and the first thing that she noticed was a lot of torn up papers on the floor. Out of habit, she started picking up these papers to only notice that they concerned a certain runesmith. These are. Oh, that. You can burn them, we won't be needing those anymore. But that's not why I asked you to come here, I need you to do your bureaucratic magic. She wanted to ask the reason why these torn up papers were there. It didn't really take much for her to figure out why she saw Wayland being so mad. The guildmaster had clearly broken his ties with him for some reason, and this reason was soon revealed to her. What would you like me to do, guildmaster? Elydia posed her question and she quickly got a response. The theme would be the Dwarven Union and the contract would forbid their involvement with a certain runesmith. It appeared that Ordhan had bent the knee to the Union and decided to cut his ties with Wayland, at least when crafting was concerned. What it all came down to was an agreement between both the Union and the Guild. The dwarves would stop using their connection to force the prices down and allow their guild-run stores to operate normally. They would even be tasked to supply them with some magical weapons and armor. Sir, do you really want me to fashion a contract like this? I think Mr. Wayland has been working fine with the Guild. Elydia, you are a good worker, but this does not concern you, just do your job and stop asking questions. Were you always this chatty? She was quickly shut down by the burly man in front of her and had to move her head down. Ever since the Armand debacle, she felt like the work environment had become tenser. Why she even asked about the reason was a bit odd. This was not something she would have done before, at least not if it didn't concern someone from her own foster family. With all the information in her notebook, she returned to the floor below. There she needed to find the guild's monoscribe that would fashion the contract. The sun had gone down already, which meant that she would be stuck explaining the final details of the contract for quite some time. The guild master wanted to have it by the next day, which meant that she would probably need to come in earlier than usual to continue the work. These sorts of papers weren't done in an hour, and she also needed to run it through another advisor to see if she didn't make any mistakes. Why do I put up with this? She gave out a long sigh before wandering into one of the side rooms. Inside she found her co-worker buried in some papers which soon would increase. While Elydia was stuck with more overtime, Roland was on his way back home. He had a lot to think about as the guild master brought up some concerning things. He was sure that he would be able to sustain his home by his own volition. He had convinced himself that his runic items were just too good to not be bought up by the adventurers. Even if the Dwarven Union came for him, he could match their prices as he was the one building everything. Then his worldview was shattered as Ordhan had mentioned that he would not be able to use the auction house. This was his main strategy if things went wrong, using the establishment that had previously brought him money. But apparently, the dwarves were already working on banning him from participating in the auctions. The only realistic way to go about this would be to hire someone to buy and sell for him. The biggest problem with that was trust. He would need to find a trustworthy merchant that would work with him. If he was on the Dwarven hit list, almost all of the good merchants would ignore his plea of help. They were still out there to make profits, and angering the union would only make things troublesome. This only left inexperienced merchants or ones with shady backgrounds. Due to Roland's networking skills, he had gained no real business partners. The only thing that he ever did was to give his wares over to the auction house or hand Bernier them to do it for him. There were no good deals or people in high places that were looking out for him. The guild was supposed to do it, but they buckled under the pressure at the first sight of the problem. This just showed him that if he ever wanted to get something done, he would need to do it himself. While the guild master offered him a way out, he was not sure if he was willing to go through with it yet. Not like I won't have anything to eat, but I've already started to build the store. While he could still earn his keep as a silver-grade adventurer, he had already put other things in motion. The contract with the construction firm was signed, and the construction of his new store building was not going to be cheap. Without money, he would need to halt his golem construction. Golems required an astonishing amount of resources and time. The little magical robot that he made wouldn't really be of use for anything. It could only move around and be a mild annoyance, and without figuring out golem software he wouldn't be able to program in more actions. If he relied only on his adventurer income, it would force him to spend most of his days in the dungeon. This would force him to lower his time as a rune smith. It would be hard to compete with the other craftsmen if he wasn't able to produce enough stock. Should I really trust that Baldy? He looked down onto a piece of paper. It was another one of those letters. He was given it by the guild master along with instructions. Roland was given a way of getting in contact with some friends that would help him out with his material problem. For now, he decided to place this letter in his spatial bag for safekeeping. Soon he would need to make a decision, as he was already running low on funds. On the next day, he was to go back to the guild and take his earnings from this month. This would be the end of his relationship with the guild stores, at least the open one. If he took the guild master's advice and if it worked out well, he would be somewhat indebted to him. Before he gave him any more credit, he would need to find out if his claims were correct. Bernier would also give him some advice. He was the person that always went to the market. Maybe he could point out someone that could work with them. Finally, he returned home to give his only worker the bad news. Bernier didn't react in kind to the way the Union was treating them, and this was magnified by his history of being ostracized from his own community for being only half-dwarf. Damn bastards, who do they think they are? Let's go over to them and blast a couple of grenades through their windows, boss. I know a good spot, they won't know what hit them. Calm down, Bernier, if we do that we'll just end up in prison. While he wished to do nothing more than lob a few runic bombs into the dwarven shops, this would clearly cause him to go under in a day. If he wasn't caught by the guards at the shops, he would probably be quickly given a wanted poster. There were too many ways to apprehend people in this world, and he was not the stealthy type. But what will we do? If we can't buy any crafting materials, will we go out of business? Are you going to move to another city? The easiest way to get around this would be to move elsewhere. The biggest problem with that option was that he would need to build himself up from scratch again. Even then it could not pan out without signing off with a bigger company for support. The union could easily ban them from the next auction house they moved to, and he could go back to square one. First, calm down, it's getting late, we will go to town tomorrow and see how bad it really is. You have some people that you know, I need you to ask around if there would be any merchants willing to supply us with materials like deep steel. Roland decided to try working out an agreement with some merchants. On the dawn of the other day, he and Bernier parted ways as they began their search for a business partner. Just as he had suspected, though, no one was willing to hear them out. He quickly realized the power of networking and how he should have been actively participating in it. Roland went out of his way to avoid interaction with other people due to his trust issues. If he actually showed himself to be someone trustworthy, he might have not been in this predicament. How was it on your end? Roland asked Bernier, who just shook his head. Those bastards work fast, every merchant that saw me averted their eyes. It's clear that they have all been paid off or are too afraid to offend the union. While Roland could probably do business with the merchants if there was anything else than metals and smithing involved, the union held a chokehold on the entire kingdom when his craft was involved. With most of the mines and smithies occupied by them, no one else was willing to go out of their way to go against them. They didn't just give up on the first day. Roland and Bernier continued going through the city, though the half-dwarf did most of the work as his boss quickly found out that he didn't really know anyone in the city. The only people that he really talked to were the adventurers, and the guild already showed that they wouldn't be working with him. Just like the guild master had told him, when he went over to the auction house he was given a long-winded explanation of why he was not allowed to sell anything there. He was considering trying to hide his face and sneaking in to sell some wares. But there weren't that many runic items going around. The people from the auction house could force him to reveal his face or use some identification. He was sure that the dwarves made sure to increase the examination requirements on any runic wares coming from unidentified people. Roland even tried visiting the stores that he used to work with. One of them was where Diana worked. Even though the woman showed interest in him before, she was now looking out for herself. "I'm sorry, Wayland, this isn't anything personal, but unless you can give me a better deal, I'm stuck here." Not like he didn't understand where she was coming from. It was either to work with the dwarves that had all the money in the world or try helping him out with no real incentive to be had. "But if you ever need some help with other things, don't be a stranger. They only told us not to sell your wares, they never said we can't trade in other services. If it's anything besides a runic item, I could probably sneak it in." She gave him a little wink before sending him on his way. While he wouldn't be able to sell anything in their stores that gave his involvement away, he could still hand in other items, which would actually give Bernier an outlet to place his armors in. This wouldn't fix the issue that he was battling now. Regular armors and weapons didn't sell for that much. They were mostly used by low-level adventurers. The real money was always in magical items and gear. After a few days of not really making any progress, Roland was stuck with a backlog of runic swords and daggers. They had already been delivered for rune crafting, and due to him already finishing the order he was unable to return it. The guild informed him that due to the deal with the dwarves they would not be able to sell them. With that, his only real revenue stream that he could gain good money from was repairing runic equipment. He was still the only runesmith in town and could handle the orders at his home. The word was slowly spreading, and neither the guild nor the union could stop the adventurers from coming over for his services. Even though he could take a lot of money for the repairs, this wouldn't fix the problem. The items that he was fixing were already rare and not like they broke down every month and needed constant repairs. Roland stayed up late the night, and while going through some of the golem research, the guild master's letter caught his eye. If he did nothing about this predicament, he worried that he would be run out of town. He invested far too much time into his home and now store to just roll over and take it from the Union like this. While he might have been able to survive in the short term, there could come a time when the Union brings over their own runesmith. Then they could easily price him out of his repairing services, maybe even run some kind of smearing campaign to undermine his future runic creations. This was a critical moment in his life. The city was about to go through another gold rush. More and more adventurers were arriving and everyone was expanding. If he didn't follow the trend, he would remain stagnant. Now was the time to act and to seize his future. If he did not, he might as well sign a contract with the Dwarven Union and be done with it. The black market, hey. He glanced at the letter and knew what it entailed. While he was apprehensive to work with the people that would be the first ones to rob him blind, he knew that they would not hold the Union in many regards. They were profiteers first that didn't really align themselves with anyone or anything. On the other hand, it was a good chance to see how the criminal underbelly in this world looked like. He already knew that most successful people somewhat rubbed shoulders with the Thieves Guild, and ignoring them could come biting him in the behind later on in his life. Chapter 153 To the Den of Thieves. They sure picked an odd spot for this. Roland found himself looking down an old well. He had put on his runic glasses so he could see all the way down, and it was quite a large drop. After leaning back, he looked to the side and could spot people moving back and forth by the road. This well that he was standing at had once been used by the old Albrook farmers. It had long dried up and was left close to the road that led to the Albrook dungeon. Roland had the letter that the guild master had given him in his pocket. That day when he had a conversation with him, he was given some instructions. The letter was supposedly an introduction to the people that run the underground businesses in this city, the Thieves Guild. How the guild master of the Adventurers Guild knew the Thieves Guild was a bit perplexing. But after further consideration, he realized that the two guilds didn't really have anything at odds with each other. Not like they had conflicting interests, they were actually quite similar. While the adventurers from the guild were more like mercenaries and hired soldiers, the guild members from the Thieves Guild were more like hired assassins and information gatherers. If a task was too difficult for any adventurer, it wasn't wrong to go to the underground and hire someone that was more prone to taking risks. The Adventurer Guild was a proper business, and this limited their scope of actions. They had rules that kept their adventurers from getting into too much danger. They had ratings for each one of them and the missions they were expected to take. Thus they limited the loss of lives through a vetting process. The thieves, on the other hand, didn't care about things like that. They somewhat had an internal rating between each other, but nothing of the sort as the adventurers did. They would not keep their members from accepting difficult jobs that could cost them their life. Their masters didn't care, and most of the time the job's pay was proportional to the guild member you got. This somewhat made it more difficult for the one hiring to get a good deal, but that was one of the reasons why these types of people were called criminals. There it goes. Roland threw the letter into the well while somewhat looking in all directions. To others, it would look as if he was throwing trash into this well, and that was mostly what people did here. How this message would reach the Thieves Guild was unknown to him, but magic was probably involved. It made sense that if a person wished to get involved with them, needed to know a person that was a Thieves Guild member. It was somewhat of an exclusive club that was difficult to get into, but even more difficult to get out of. This was something the guild master had warned him about, but not like Roland wanted to become a member of the Thieves Guild. His purpose was to get access to the black market merchants. At first, Roland was concerned about this letter. Anyone could see him throwing something into the well if they wanted to look. Then, after thinking it over, it was clear that the thieves were just trying to be smart about it. Who would think that they were actually using easily accessible places for contacting each other? This was also apparently not the only contact point. The guild master informed him that it changed every couple of weeks. While it was a well now, it could change to a tree stump in the forest or even a loose brick in one of the houses in the city. This was also why he needed to do it within a short time frame. If he didn't do it now, he would have no way of knowing what the next contact point would be changed to. From what he said, I need to wait a few days for a reply. Which Roland did. While his letter of introduction was going through, he decided to venture into the dungeon for a change. He had managed to reconstruct his old armor, but with the lack of funds, he still needed to go with the Mana Stone variant. It looked mostly the same, but he decided to ditch the characteristic crimson coloring. For now, he went with a more pitch black variant, which also made the runic symbols stick out less if they weren't being used. If used, he would stick out even more, as they did glow in various colors of the rainbow. The golems and tier 2 monsters on the lower levels didn't really pose much of a threat to him, as he was slowly gaining levels. The speed of his progress had slowed down since his last dungeon run, but thanks to him getting the tier 3 schematics, he was slowly going for that 100th level. Name: Roland Arden, L90. Classes: T2 Runesmith Lord, L15 Primary. T1 Mage, L25 Secondary. T1 Runic Mana Scribe, L25X. T1 Runic Blacksmith, L25 Tertiary. HP: 3351/3351. MP: 8157/8865. SP: 3022/4529. Strength: 90. Agility: 67. Dexterity: 118. Vitality: 90. Endurance: 99. Intelligence: 151. Willpower: 139. Charisma: 17. Luck: 10. Not yet high. Roland looked at both his own and Agni's status screen. Agni was at the level cap of 50, but the mystical Ruby Wolf variant was still grayed out. He had progressed through the levels by leeching from his master and did it too fast. Even now he was a few levels short with his mana-related skills. While to most people the 100th level meant their second tier 2 class, for him it would take a bit longer. Only when he reached the 125th level would his Runesmith Lord class be maxed out. He still could get a new one when he hit it, but there wasn't really a reason for it. He was thinking about using a class change crystal when he achieved the 100th level. It was still possible for a person to look at the classes they could change to without switching to them. He could even go through some of the trials as a test without passing through them on purpose. It wasn't odd for people to reach a level cap for their class and then try to gain hidden titles or traits. From what he knew, this was how people in the old days went about discovering new classes. They continued to gain new skills, titles, and abilities, and then went to see if any new classes become available to them. Even then, some classes remained hidden away from the public eyes. Like his Runesmith Lord class, that probably only became accessible to him through skills like debugging. His noble birth could have something to do with it as well, but he wasn't quite sure of the importance of bloodlines. I wonder if I could use any of this for crafting materials. Roland gave a pile of red rocks a swift kick to reveal a golem core under them. These were the remains of a volcanic golem that after so much time he had learned to defeat with ease. Some of the books say that some of the golem parts can be smelted down into proper ingots. Roland examined a piece of the rocky golem. Regretfully, this one wasn't of the metal golem variant that had enough raw metal in its body to be used as a resource. These rocky golems would be suited towards the enchanted golem models more. Apparently, there was a way to reanimate the remains of these rocky monsters and have them work through the use of mana. The only problem, as always, remained was the mana uptake. Only a powerful mage would have enough mana to support a whole golem and have it work full-time. Roland was somewhat a mage himself, but if he would be able to learn such spells remained to be seen. He could ask the cat professor if it was feasible, but he was somewhat afraid that he would be laughed at for asking a stupid question. There was a possibility of mining some rare minerals in this dungeon. The biggest problem was that most of it fell to the Adventurers Guild and the Dwarven Union, that liked to monopolize anything involving mining. Even now he could see some dwarven workers hitting the dungeon walls with pickaxes while being protected by a small adventurer battalion. If he wanted to join the mining, he would probably catch the ire of the people working here. While no one really had any rights to the dungeon, it was forbidden for him to get involved with the mining efforts. If he did, he would be fined by the guild or even banned if they caught him doing it. This only left him with the option of finding a spot that was not mapped out by the others. Thus his gaze turned to the large lake of lava that had the entrance to that large pocket of rare metals and minerals. If he was only able to get strong enough to farm it, his future would be assured. "Come Agni, let us go back." Whine. Agni wiggled his tail while snorting at the volcanic golem. "What's wrong?" Roland asked while Agni started scratching the golem's body a bit. "Ah, do you want a mana stone?" The golems didn't come with any mana stones, so his wolf remained without his favorite snack. Roland did try to feed him the crumbled golem cores one time, but Agni didn't seem to like them too much. "Okay, we'll get one salamander, but then we are going back." After slaying one of the salamander-type monsters, Agni had his mana stone to nibble at, and the two returned to the upper levels through the shortcut. Then when he was right at the exit from the dungeon, an unfamiliar person bumped into him. Oh, excuse me." Just from the outset, the whole thing looked fishy. Roland, with his new parallel thinking skill, was now more aware than ever. He clearly saw the person shift their weight and bump into him on purpose for some reason. He wanted to grab this hooded person by the hand and ask him what this was all about, but then he noticed him trying to force something into his hand. When he realized what it was, he just let it be, and the person soon disappeared down into the dungeon. Roland made sure to walk away from the dungeon before he opened his hand up again. In it was a crumpled up piece of paper. Instantly he knew who the man that bumped into him was, and the piece of paper confirmed it. "That was fast. How did they know that I was down in the dungeon at this time?" What was on the paper was a set of passages and also an address. He was sure to read through it and remember everything before setting the piece of paper ablaze. It felt a bit eerie that he had been contacted this soon by the members of the criminal underbelly. He started thinking about how they could have discovered him this fast to deliver this crumbled letter. It was possible that they had a lookout at that dried up well that collected his invitation letter. Then he had been watched all the way until he descended into the dungeon, and they waited for him to get out. It was either that or magic was involved in some way or other that could give him the current location. With the knowledge of his next step, he returned home. There he informed Bernier that he would be going out into the city for the night. "Going to the city, boss? Are you going to the tavern?" Roland nodded, as this was actually the meet-up place that he needed to go to. While Bernier was mostly the one leaving towards the city to get drunk, this time around he would need to remain home with Agni. This little expedition into one of the more peculiar establishments would require a switch in gear. He might as well put a big neon sign on his back with the words "I'm Wayland the Runesmith" if he went there while wearing his usual full-plate armor. Luckily, before making the decision of throwing the letter into the well, he had already made some preparations. He bought a black robe and fitted his half-plate armor under it so that no one would be able to tell what he was wearing under it. His face would be covered by the hood and his mouth by a specially made metallic mask. From the outside, he would look like any other thieving type. The mouthpiece that made him look like a medieval ninja had a special voice-changing rune as one of its features. With it, not even people that he knew would be able to recognize his voice. He had no idea who he would meet at the den of thieves. It wouldn't be strange if some dwarves from the Union were trying to make some change by selling some unusable gear down on the black market. If they discovered that he was down there, it could cause more drama. While returning to the city, he still needed to show his face to the city guards that didn't recognize his hooded form. With the new getup passing the test, he made his way into the red light district. When he stepped in here, he could smell the strong perfume which made his nose a bit itchy. This was the time to cover his mouth, as he knew that this perfume had a small aphrodisiac mixed into it. He overheard a conversation between some adventurers that ventured into this district and knew that it was a way to take more money from the more unsuspecting customers. On his way through the street, he could see many working ladies waving to the passers-by. This road that he never really visited was quite long, and on each side, there was a large building. On some of the balconies, he spotted scantily clad women looking out. Some were just resting and looking tired, while others were winking at the potential customers. While Roland's disguise gave him the opportunity to be anonymous here, this wasn't the case for others. He recognized some people from the Adventurers Guild. This was quite the regular thing these sorts of people did. After days fighting monsters, they used their money on women and booze. These things were widely accepted as the norm in this world, quite different from the one that he came from. Is this it? He remembered the note well, and now he was standing before the establishment that it pointed him to. The sign in front of it depicted a heart that was shot through with an arrow. Even with his mask on, he could faintly smell the strong aroma of womanly perfume. Hall of Heavenly Delights, hey! Roland wanted nothing more than to sigh out and leave. While he was younger, he imagined how it would feel to take part in the services of a professional lady. Now, on the other hand, when he got older, it got less intriguing. This still was his way into the underground market, where he could buy his materials from, which would keep him from having to seek alternative routes. Hey mister, are you looking for a good time? While standing in front of the entrance of this brothel, he was spotted by one of the working girls. It was a girl with cat ears. She was quick to shake her hips around while beckoning him over. Normally he might have even found this alluring, but at the moment he was far too nervous to concentrate. This was supposed to lead him into the den of thieves, and he was not sure what he should expect from it. There were a couple of options here. Either he would find the right black market merchants that would supply him with the resources he needed, or he would be robbed blind. The guild master assured him that nothing bad would happen to him, as the Thieves Guild is still in the building process. Apparently, the rumors about it being a place that a person could get stabbed for any small transgression was blown out of proportion. This made sense, as no merchant would be willing to do business in a place where their life was in constant danger. There were rules that people needed to follow while being there, but he still needed to conduct himself accordingly. If the thieves and ruffians saw him being fidgety, they might see that as an opportunity to start problems. Thus Roland straightened up and looked at the smiling cat girl while nodding. This Hall of Heavenly Delights was the largest brothel in the city. On the inside was the gateway for him. There he would be led to the criminal underbelly, not only of this city but of the whole kingdom. The black market was a large entity, and this would be his introduction to it. He took one step forward, and the cat lady seemed glad to see a new customer heading their way. There was a specific sidebar inside of this large brothel, and this was where he was heading. Thus he called out to the alluring woman with a question. Yes, could you show me the way to the bar? Chapter 154, The Black Market. As Roland stepped in through the wooden doors of the brothel, he was already happy that he had brought his new mouthguard along. People couldn't really see it under the fabric, but it was made from metal and had several runes inscribed on it. The strong smell of cheap perfume, sweat, and something unfamiliar made him quickly inject a small amount of mana into this mask. It was a filtering rune that quickly dispatched the awful smell and filled his lungs up with fresh air. This face mask covered both his nose and mouth. It was specifically made for the sole reason to hide his real voice and filter out poison. He was going into a place filled with rogues, and he knew that those types liked to employ various poison gases. There were even classes that made these poison attacks more potent. The best and easiest way to protect someone from this type of attack was a gas mask. He made a smaller magical variant for himself that didn't require him to wear an oxygen tank. On the inside, he could hear a lot of chatting and laughing. He could see many beautiful women of various races talking to various burly-looking adventurers. There was a stark contrast between them, as the men clearly didn't bother to dress themselves well. Welcome, weary traveler. While the cat lady that greeted him at the building's entrance went away, another beauty approached him from the front. This girl looked elvish in nature, but the ears were somewhat shorter. Her hair also had an uncharacteristic red color, which made Roland think that she was probably a half-elf instead. Dear customer, you look confused. Could it be your first time here? Do you wish for me to explain the rules? This was indeed Roland's first time in such an establishment. Due to the amount of skin that was being shown, his eyes did trace to a couple of the scantily clad women. With his new parallel thinking skill, he was actually able to get a good look at all the goods even while talking to this woman. "Ah, not that won't be necessary. I heard that you had a pub here." While this was mainly a brothel, there was a smaller pub inside of it. That was where he was heading, as the entrance to his destination was there. "Would you like one of the girls to accompany you? I'm sure that such a handsome man as you would love to have some company." The elven woman got closer. Roland was on the taller side, so while looking down he had a clear view at her rather exposed cleavage. If he had to compare the women from this world and his old one, it was obvious that the ones here outranked them by several points. To this moment he had never seen a bad-looking elf or half-elf. Even the average human would be above average if they visited his old world. He had to attribute that to the stats like charisma that probably made everyone somewhat more attractive if they leveled up. "No, that's fine, I just need something to drink." After a little back and forth he had managed to shake the half-elven hostess and arrived at the bar. Inside of it, he could see some patrons having their drinks poured to them by beauties. It was hard not to notice one of these clients, as he stuck out like a sore thumb. "You're so strong, Armand." A cat girl was poking Roland's favorite idiot friend's biceps while he was flexing without a shirt. His face was flushed red, so it was clear that he was fully drunk and probably under the effect of some of the aphrodisiacs. Luckily for him, he was far too busy with what he was doing to notice Roland walking in. After passing some of the drunks, he arrived at the bar counter where he sat down. "What will it be, honey?" He looked over to the bartender. He needed to do a double take as the person behind him was quite the muscular man. This wasn't the reason why he was taken aback. The reason was that this man had an awful large amount of makeup on his face. Rosy cheeks, red lipstick, and fake eyelashes. Then to top it all off, he was wearing a one-piece dress with open shoulders. His arms were thick as a tree trunk, and he could give the Adventure Guild Master a run for his money. "Oh, are you a shy boy? I love shy boys. What will it be?" The bartender giggled like a little girl while leaning in. The moment he did, Roland could notice his 5 o'clock shadow. "Ah yes, I'm not really here to drink, I seek the passage below." "Passage? What do you mean, cutie? I'm not sure I understand." Roland was not beginning to doubt the letter that he received, but it was hard to turn back now. While the bartender lady was playing dumb, she could have just been wary of people that would come to disturb the guild. This is also why he leaned in, so that no one else would hear the password that he was supposed to say. "The password is Schwartfish." He felt a bit silly saying it while trying to not stick out. But this was all according to the guild master's instructions, along with the crumpled up paper. He was supposed to get the password and just tell it to the bartender in this brothel. If this turned up to be some elaborate joke, on the other hand, he would probably have a bad day. "Oh, haven't heard that one in a while. Do you have the entry fee, sugar?" Luckily for him, the exchange was going through just as the guild master explained to him. The password that he was given identified him as a newbie black merchant, not as a guild member. It was more of an introduction to the guild, and he would need to pay the price to enter inside. Of course. He placed 5 small gold coins on the counter, and the large person quickly swiped it. Roland wasn't sure where his gold disappeared to, but it was apparent that this bartender was not simple. This fee was steep, but it identified him as a potential black market merchant. The actual thieves that wished to join the guild would go through different testing methods. He, on the other hand, would be seen as a potential business partner. The coins were there to show that he actually had enough money to use their services. "Rika, take over, I'll be back in a moment." The bartender was replaced by a tall lady with long white rabbit ears while the man in the dress started leaving. Roland followed behind him, and the two entered the back room of this pub. There was a long corridor through which he went through. There were several tired-looking women smoking cigarettes and putting on various lingerie inside. It looked like this was the dressing room for the working ladies, and it reminded him of the back room of strip clubs from his old world. At the end of the corridor was a door, and before it stood a somewhat imposing-looking man. With the bartender leading him there, the man just stepped to the side and both of them descended into this room. The inside was dark and the smell of booze filled his nostrils. It seemed that they had entered a wine cellar, as there were many bottles and barrels with alcohol everywhere. "Now listen, sugar, I'm not sure who gave you the invitation, but you'll be on your own when you go inside. Try not to start trouble or you might regret it." Roland nodded as the large man in a dress gave him some pointers. The two arrived at the end of the wine cellar, and after pushing one of the bricks in, a mechanism was turned on. The wall started to slowly spin and another path was revealed to him. "Well, good luck." "Wait, aren't you forgetting something?" Roland asked as the words of the guildmaster were still stuck in his head. He clearly told him that the person at this pub was supposed to hand him something that was paramount to his visit down there. "Oh, did little me forget something?" "I don't think so." The man tried playing cute, but Roland could see his muscular body getting stiff. It was clear that he was getting ready for battle. Without backing down though, he stuck out his hand as if he wanted the item that he was owed. "Don't play stupid, I paid for it. Are we going to have a problem?" The two people began staring at each other without saying anything. It looked as if a fight could break out at a drop of a hat. Roland did come with a sword strapped to his side, but even without it, he could activate various spells almost instantly. "Ho ho ho, I was just being silly, sugar, here you go." The large man that continued to talk like a young girl finally gave in. After a moment he took out an emblem that looked like a triangle with an eye above it. This was the symbol of the underground merchants, which he would need if he actually wanted to trade here. If he entered there without it, he would be able to go around, but no one would actually trade with him. Then he would also not be able to return without paying another 5 small gold coins. The guildmaster warned him that the gatekeeper could decide to test him. This was something that he needed to watch out for, as there were few rules that these criminals adhered to. While he told him that no fight should break out, this depended on his deposition. If the large dress-wearing man thought that he was easy prey, he would have probably robbed him blind here and there. Roland quickly swiped the symbol and entered through the opened passage. As it closed behind him, he could see his guide smiling and sending a flying kiss towards him. If not for his masked face, his frown would be noticed quite fast. Everything is going according to plan, at least somewhat. The corridor that he was in now was lit up with some torches on the side. He placed his hands on the walls and could instantly tell that they were hardened through some magic. It felt like this passage was constructed recently. He continued further and his narrower corridor connected to a larger one. This larger one looked to be the main space and also the gathering spot. There were many other passages connecting to it that he could see. These were coming from other similar locations like the brothel that he came from. While he was looking around, he noticed someone walking through one of the other smaller corridors. The person was dressed up in similar black robes as him, but instead of a mouth mask, he or she had a full face mask. Without introducing themselves, the person just passed by him and continued on their way. The way that this person was holding their hand to their hip didn't go unnoticed though. There Roland saw a dagger strapped onto a belt. The person was clearly wary of him and ready to attack at a moment's notice. "I need to watch myself, this could quickly turn sour if I don't pay attention." This made him be more on his toes. He was now underground in the city where the laws didn't reach. It was probably a daily occurrence for the people down here to end up dead and never to be seen again if they offended the wrong person. He continued through the larger passage and soon he could spot more robed people. Some were hiding their faces while others didn't seem to care. It became louder and louder the more he continued. Then after about 5 minutes of walking, he found out where the voices were coming from. It was a large underground cave with various small wooden shacks placed all over it. In these shacks, he could see people peddling their wares. Some had weapons, others had various gems, and then others some peculiar-looking potions. This was the underground marketplace that he had heard about. From what he knew, these kinds of places existed all over the kingdom and their scope increased depending on the city they were placed in. While he was at first confused about how something like this could exist under the city, he realized that something was off. The crummy shacks looked hastily put together and the ceiling support pillars were even being worked on as he was looking. It seemed that this underground black market had been hastily put together and it had not yet taken its final form. This made a lot of sense as Albrook was still in the process of developing itself. Okay, I'm here, what now? While he had arrived in this place, Roland was not sure how he should approach the black market merchants. It didn't seem like the people here cared that he was here, mostly they were just annoyed due to him just standing there and looking at everything. It would have been nice to have some kind of guide to show him around, but it didn't seem that there was such a convenient person around here. Though after further investigation he noticed a blackboard with some words written on them along with a sort of map. When he approached it he realized that it was a conveniently drawn layout of this underground. There was the large corridor that he came from and the name Hall of Heavenly Delights was written over one of the buildings, which were represented by a rectangle shape. This was quite handy as now he also discovered a few other places that were connected to this underground area. One was the brothel, another was an inn that he knew, and then the third one was the tavern that he had the scuffle with that adventurer party. It seemed that he would probably be able to get here through one of the three. Some of the exits were also marked there, but they were in other locations. Apparently, one was not supposed to leave the same way that they came in. The guildmaster had mentioned something like that, and Roland now looked to the passage that would take him to the exit. With his escape route now being recognized, he decided to take a look at the seedy merchants. For the time being, he was not interested in selling anything, his purpose was buying exotic metals and minerals for his runic creations. This place was rather large, and by each merchant's stall, he could at least see one imposing man standing. It was clear that the black market merchants had to hire their own muscle. When he approached one of the merchants that he was potentially interested in, he heard some noise to the side. "What are you trying to pull here, you bastard? What's your problem? You got what you wanted, there are no refunds. This is clearly fake, give me back my money." A little scuffle unfolded as one of the customers was not happy about what he had bought. Roland saw him throw some kind of vial with a green potion to the ground. He then pulled out a curved dagger and started pointing it at the person that he bought it from. Roland wasn't stupid as he instantly backed away while looking at the other people here. In situations like this, it would not be strange if others used the ensuing chaos to try some tricks like pickpocketing. The other people were of the same mind as everyone was on full alert. "What's this noise? Calm down, you idiots, fighting here is forbidden." To his surprise, someone actually confronted the man that was shouting. Two hooded people appeared out of nowhere, their robes seemed somewhat better than the rags everyone else was wearing, and there was a certain symbol that indicated that they were actual Thief Guild members. When the man that was making noise noticed them, he instantly put his dagger away. The bodyguard of the merchant also backed away. It was clear to Roland that there was some degree of protection here and fighting was indeed forbidden. This didn't mean that this man couldn't take his grudges elsewhere, the merchant would probably need to worry about getting stabbed in a dark alley now. With the commotion, Roland turned back to the stall that he previously spotted. There he saw a strange merchant covered in rags. While he couldn't see his face, he could tell that this person was not a human. The elongated fingers that were covered in fur and ended in claws gave it away. "Welcome, welcome. What are ya buyin'? What are ya sellin'? If I'm not mistaken, that's a deep silver ingot, and is that durium ore?" After activating his analyzing skill, he noticed that this merchant was selling various exotic metals, some that would normally be quite hard to come by. It looked that he would actually be able to trade. Now it remained to be seen if this strange merchant gave him the right price for his troubles. Chapter 155 Black Market Hospitality. Roland found himself face to face with a member of the rat folk race. This race of sentient rat people was known for living underground and shying away from the sun. There weren't that many of them around, but whenever the black market was involved they were there. They were a race of mostly stealthy merchants. Most of their people were poised at hiding, which allowed them to sneak through the night unnoticed. While their bodies didn't allow them to be the best warriors, they were good at subterfuge and espionage. Many of the information guilds had a good relationship with them as they were quite good at spying. Their enhanced hearing skills allowed them to listen in on various conversations while being unnoticed during the night. It wasn't surprising that Roland managed to find one of them here. If he would get a good price was still up to debate though. Yes, that deep silver ingot and that durium, how much? The Haman has an eye for quality. Skeek will give him a good price. Through the years of living in this world, Roland had also gone through a few stores. Even though this was the black market, the bartering was not much different. After going back and forth, he managed to get the ingot's price down that was only about 10% over its regular market value. While normally he would not take any materials over the market price, he didn't really have a choice. What he could do now was either shake on it and pay or look around some more to see if other merchants gave him a better price. This could bite him in the behind though. If there were no other merchants selling metal ingots, this rat here could increase the price further. This was a basic tactic from all merchants. Watching the potential customers to see how much they were willing to pay was something they did. This market here wasn't that large, so it wouldn't be hard to figure out that he was here for the crafting materials. This, as far as skis will go, you buy in. Fine, you got a deal. This time around Roland decided to take a small hit to his purse. While getting some of the resources, he also started asking some questions. He was only getting a couple of ingots and some ores, but this would not be enough for him and Bernier to produce much. What he needed was a constant supply of these metals, not just a random ingot here and there. It was a bit too early to strike a long-lasting deal with the first person that he was doing business with. It would be better for him to stake this place out and see how the prices fluctuate. With what he got today, he would be able to make a few items that could fetch a good price. While the Dwarven Union was trying to keep him from selling, he wasn't sure if they would be able to bribe or blackmail everyone. It wouldn't be odd if he could find a proper merchant that would be fine with taking some of his stock and selling it in a different city. The other options that he had were doing it here on the black market and then using his own shop where he could earn the most. The only thing required to create a shop was owning or renting the land that it was on. From what he could tell, the Union did their business in a legit way. They did use tactics that were considered legal by pricing out their opposition. This was something that Bernier confirmed as well. The dwarves were somewhat prideful and would not use force to get rid of the competition. Thus he should not see any hired ruffians visiting his store to mess it up. At most, they would try to smear his image by trying to discredit his craft. Luckily for him, that would not be that easy, as his runic weapons were already spread through Albrook. Some of the weapons and armor that was given to him for repairs was made by him. After getting some of the materials that he needed, Roland spent the rest time looking around the black market. This was a good time for his analyzing and mathematical skills to shine. With their help, he started identifying the wares that were being sold along with their prices. Thanks to his high intelligence stat, he was able to easily remember the current market prices and compare them to these wares. He expected to find that everything was somewhat over the normal price, but he was surprised that there were a lot of items below it. There were probably various reasons for these prices, one of them being if they were stolen or not. A stolen good could be sold for a lot less and the merchant could still make a profit. The thieves mostly dumped their items to these merchants here at a low price, and depending on the deal it reflected what they cost here. Besides the rat person, Roland did manage to spot a few other merchants that could provide him with crafting materials. The prices didn't vary that much, as the people here were probably aware of what they could get away with. The biggest issue was to get himself a steady stream of materials. Going between three merchants that would probably constantly barter the prices up would be a headache. If he could actually get a proper steady supplier was still up to debate. I guess I should head home. After going through all the vendors and their wares, Roland now had a good idea about this black market. There was a clear focus on shady weapons, as daggers and poison was even sold as a bundle. If he managed to figure out a poison rune of some kind, he would probably be able to sell assassination tools like hotcakes here. For now, he was eyeing one of the archer stalls which possessed arrows dipped in paralyzing liquid. Making runic arrows required special mana-conductive wood, but it would actually be possible for him to get it. Down in the dungeon, there were some special trees that were able to survive the blistering hot environment. Arrows that could be given magical effects could be made from it. Previously he ignored them as he was easily able to use the guild connections to fashion runic swords instead that sold for more. Now on the other hand he could use that as a side job if he ever decided to push his item onto this market. He still had to think this through as he wasn't sure if he wanted one of his creations being used to kill innocent people. Normally his weapons and armor were made with the intent of fighting monsters. But he did not fool himself into believing that the people using them would only use them for the intended purpose. He would be surprised if some of his runic scrolls were already used to kill some innocent people instead. While thinking about what he should do, he started looking at the people here. It was somewhat loud as the merchants and customers were furiously bartering with each other. It's a lot more peaceful than I expected. Roland was still a bit on edge, but after going through this marketplace a few times he realized that it wasn't much different than the one on the surface. There were surprisingly fewer thieves here than above ground. It seemed that these people at least didn't steal from each other. He also used his identification skill on the people here. While most of them were wearing similar trinkets to him that blocked him from seeing their names, some didn't. Was this just the barrier between the ones that had more money, or did they trust that the people here would not give them away? From what he knew there was some honor between thieves, but he only knew what other adventurers told him. Apparently, the thieves would not steal from each other, at least when being down here, nor would they report each other to the city guards. If there was an issue between them they would clear it up in their own way. It seemed that they didn't trust the powers that run their kingdom and had their own version of the king as well. There were many guilds spread through this kingdom and the others. On the very top existed someone called the Shadow King that no one actually knew the identity. It was apparently the strongest thief guild member, and he was apparently comparable to the top class holders in the land. If it was true or just a tale to keep the rowdy thieves in check was anyone's guess. Maybe if he stayed here longer he would be given the answers. He soon ended up with the map that showed him the places that he could exit through. It wasn't drawn too well, but it was very easy to read. It was clear that it was made with simplicity in mind, as the exits were drawn in with red circles while the dead ends with red X's. While this was only the black market portion of the underground, there still was the Thieves Guild down here. Roland could see a tunnel leading in one direction, and it was guarded by several thuggish-looking people. Sometimes they let people in, but he never saw anyone go out, and they always gave off an aura of hostility when they were approached. Could be where the Thieves Guild is being constructed, or maybe it's the place where they store the stolen goods. It would be nice to know what was past that corridor. He was not in a hurry to get himself killed. Now came the time to leave, so he followed the map to the closest exit spot. It took a moment for him to register the exit route, as even though the map was easy to read, there were a lot of winding tunnels that could confuse someone that was here for the first time. After entering the tunnel he started walking. With a slow pace, he continued towards his destination. After 5 minutes of walking, he noticed something that he had been worried about. Someone is following me. This was what he was afraid would happen after he descended into the black market. It was the first time for him, and he didn't have any real connections. The guild master gave him a warning that something like this could happen if he stood out too much. Probably spending a prolonged time looking over all of the black market merchants put a nice sign on his back. It wasn't hard to pick out someone that was out of their element. Even more when the people around were trained thieves whose job was robbing people. Roland increased his pace as he realized that someone was trailing behind. While underground he would be forced to fight if he managed to get to the exit, the people following him would be unable to do anything. It also could have been someone that was heading towards the same exit. He was wearing a set of runic half-plate armor under this black robe. On his side, he had a sword that could also produce magical effects that he had made. The only thing that he was missing was a shield that was a bit too bulky to take along down here. Then when going past a corner he came to a halt. Before him stood a robed figure with their mouth covered. The light was quite dim here, as nothing else than one torch on the wall was illuminating this corridor. What do we have here? Fresh blood. The person started talking, and the voice was not something that he recognized. Almost instantly he tried retreating, but the path behind him became blocked by two other people. "Where do you think you are going?" It was another male voice, but from the tone, he noticed that it probably belonged to someone younger. Next to this person stood someone a bit shorter and with a bow in hand. From the robed figure, he could tell that it was probably a woman. "What do you want?" he asked while using the item that masked his voice. Due to going down into the den of the thieves, he was sure to make it sound somewhat menacing. Even then the person in front of him didn't seem convinced and continued. "What do we want?" he asks. The person that was behind him started laughing along with the one that was talking. The girl with the bow continued to point it without moving a muscle. That is until he laid his eyes on her and he could see her twitch slightly. It felt that she was not used to this kind of thing. Even though he was surrounded, he wasn't scared that much, as he could somewhat tell that all these three people were below his own level. Their names were masked by something, but he could see that the highest level person here was the archer, and she was just a tier 2 class holder. "Give us your purse and you can pass, if not then we'll have to take it by force," the hooded person proclaimed while also pulling out a nice-looking dagger. Now Roland had a decision to make: would he fight or give these people his items? He was not someone that shied away from conflict, and he was also wearing a set of his own crafted armor. "How about I give you a proposition instead?" he replied while looking at the person that was probably the leader. "Oh. We'll forget that this ever happened and you get to keep your lives." "Ha, we got a tough guy here." The person in front of him didn't seem to be taken back by his reply, as he just laughed. Roland knew that they wouldn't be backing away without him showing his hand. Thus while the person was still talking, he raised his hand in his direction. While his palm was going up, a green glow burst forth from under his robe. The thief in front saw this and tried to quickly move to the side, but the spell that Roland was using wouldn't allow for such a thing. The spell that was used caused a burst of green wind energy to fly towards the person brandishing the dagger. Due to the lack of space in this corridor, the thief had no place to dodge and he was sent flying in the opposite direction. Shit. While the man in front of him was blown away, the other male behind him started shouting, "Fuck, get him!" The archer woman stalled for a moment but then quickly released the arrow from her bow. It was a good shot that went straight for his thigh. Before the arrow had connected with his leg though, a burst of fiery energy incinerated it on the spot. It was a simple tier 2 fire shield spell that was engraved on his chest plate. With his runic skills working, he was able to shift through spells with no casting required. A normal mage would quickly be piled on by these three thieves here, but Roland was not a simple mage. With another burst of green energy, the two people behind him were sent flying and collided with the wall behind them. There was enough power in this tier 2 wind blast spell to knock the wind out of the two. This gave him enough time to gather mana for a more lethal spell. In front of his hand, an orb of red light started forming, which expanded to a large ball of fire. While he did not intend to kill anyone here, sending a message to the Thieves Guild that they should not attack him would be in order. It was clear to him that these people would only take him seriously if they knew that he could not be trifled with. But, before shooting the ball of flames at the two people, he noticed something. Due to the wind blast that he produced, the hood was blown off the woman's head. It revealed her face and somewhat elongated ears. Roland had to stop himself from blowing this ball of fire into this girl that he knew. This didn't mean that he cancelled the spell altogether, as she would need to explain herself before he would let her off the hook. "Lobelia? What do you think you are doing?" Chapter 156 Underworld Dealings. "I'm truly sorry, Wayland. If I knew it was you, please forgive me and these idiots." "Hey, who are you calling an idiot? Put your head down, you dimwit, do you want to die?" Roland was now looking at the three people that attacked him. All three of the thieves turned up to be Lobelia and her friends. It seemed that the half-elven girl was actually part of the Thieves Guild. "Also, please don't tell this to Big Sis or that big idiot, they will kill me, that is if you don't do it now." Lobelia peeked her head up to look at Wayland that had lowered his hood a bit. He was still wearing his mask, which would protect him from any gas attacks that these thieves could try to employ. "I'm not going to kill you, but you'll have to explain a few things to me. Yes. I'm very good at explaining things. While Roland somewhat knew Lobelia, he wasn't so sure about the other two that were with her. For now, he continued to point his hand on them. A small orb of fire was still there and he had no problem in keeping it there. First, why did you try to rob me? Didn't you see this? Roland pointed to the small emblem that he was given by the bartender at the brothel. This symbol that he attached to his robe was supposed to get him through the Thieves Guild without a problem. After the guards saw it, they did allow him to trade and the merchants didn't have a problem in interacting with him after taking a glance. Ah, well. Lobelia shifted his head to the side and glared at one of the two young men. Both of them looked to be of mixed races. One had long animal ears that made him seem similar to a fox but was lacking a tail. The other one had floppier ears that were more dog-like. Sometimes it was hard to tell them apart, but most of the time they had less animalistic features. Pure beastmen had more animal-like faces along with fur below their knees and on their forearms. Their fingers also had sharp claws or talons depending on the beast tribe. These two on the other hand mostly looked like regular humans with some added accessories. He could also use his analyzing skill to see their race after the scuffle they had. Well, that's just a black merchant insignia, but you didn't have any bodyguards with you, so we thought you would be an easy target. The young man with fox ears was the one to reply. Rune, I told you that you got ripped off with that thing. Apparently, the dog boy was named Rune as the young fox man started talking to him in an angry tone. I'm sorry, Jasper, but the magician said that it should work. Rune slumped his head down even more while Jasper started berating him. Roland on the other hand raised his brow and gave another question. That thing? Could you elaborate? I'm sorry, Wayland, I'll explain, you two be quiet. This time around Lobelia replied and gave him a more detailed explanation. The thing that the young man was talking about was an identification eyeglass that was supposed to measure a person's level and present their stats. Apparently, the young thieves started examining him as he was acting a bit suspicious. The readings that the magic item gave them put him down at a lower level than them. Thus they decided to try their luck and rob him. We never intended to hurt you, we would have just taken the money, that's all. Roland frowned, but it went unnoticed as he was wearing a mask. While he believed Lobelia, as he wasn't so sure about the other two. During the fight, the half-elf did aim her bow lower towards his legs. The arrow also was coated in some kind of paralyzing agent. The story somewhat checked out, as after he was paralyzed they would be able to rob him blind. If they would have left it at that was anyone's guess. It did look like the item that he received from his old gnome boss was still working. It was not a runic item, thus he could not examine it. From his testing, he found out that it gave various readings depending on one's skill level and even time of day. Sometimes it showed him as a totally different class. Other times it would block out the text from showing it all, while on different occasions it would present the status window all jumbled up. It appeared that for these three he showed up as a low-level merchant, which made him appear as an easy target. You didn't think that I was wearing an item that blocks people from seeing my status? It did cross our minds, but we thought that we could still escape from one person. Lobelia laughed a bit while slowly sitting up. Roland had slowly started moving his hand to the side as he didn't really intend to kill these three. This didn't mean that he would just let it be, they did try to rob him and for that, they would need to pay. You two can leave, but you Lobelia, we need to have a talk. While he was somewhat annoyed that they attacked him, it seemed like this would actually be something he could profit from. Just as he had an emblem for black market merchants, these three had their own. He wasn't quite sure what rank these three had, but they were clearly members of the Thieves Guild. Lobelia, are you going to be all right? Rune asked her while looking at Roland. This didn't go unnoticed as he realized that the two young men were somewhat apprehensive about letting Lobelia be left alone with him. It's fine, I know him, I'll be fine. Just go back and say that everything is all right. The two nodded and looked at Roland with a bit of a glare. This stare down he returned in full as he didn't move his eyes away. Ever since coming to this world, Roland noticed that showing weakness would get him nowhere. Thus he kept eye contact, which made Jasper the Foxman flinch slightly before vanishing behind the corner. "First let us get out of here and then we will have a long talk." Lobelia gave Roland a weak smile and the two continued through the path to the nearest exit. On the wall there was a lever, and after lowering it the wall shifted in a similar fashion as in the brothel. The two ended up in some kind of basement that was filled with some old tools. "First time? Is it that obvious?" Roland replied to the question as he was clearly slow with walking up towards this strange basement. Lobelia showed him how to leave it and the two found themselves in the backyard of some house in the city. There are many places that are associated with the underground like this. "You mean the Thieves Guild? Does that signify that you are part of it?" Roland pointed to Lobelia's emblem that was in the shape of a kite with a circle in the middle. It was different from the one that he received, which meant that she was not part of the underground merchants like him now. "You are right, this is a sign of my rank." Roland wanted to ask about the Thieves Guild ranking system, but they were still dressed in their robes while being in someone's backyard. The person was apparently affiliated with the guild, but this didn't mean that he wanted to stay here. The two soon left and removed their clothes along with the emblems that were put into spatial bags. Then they went to the closest tavern as Roland insisted on getting more information from Lobelia's lips. While Lobelia gave out a sigh, Roland was quite happy. He had no way of knowing about the inner workings of the Thieves Guild. It was a secret organization that didn't write down its rules but went by word of mouth. With someone that was a member here, he could get all the information that he needed. Maybe he could even use her to get a better deal on the black market. "I won't ask you about why you would be in a place like this, but by what you said, you would like me to not tell Lydia about it." "Please, don't tell Big Sis." Before he could even ask the first question, Lobelia had a loud outburst. It seemed that Lydia was her weak point. It was clear that there was something personal there which Roland didn't really want to poke his face into. This didn't mean that he couldn't use this to get more info out of Lobelia. "I won't if you answer my questions, don't leave anything out." Lobelia sat down while blushing a little bit as her outburst got some of the other tavern patrons to look their way. "Sorry about that, what do you want to know?" "I would like you to give me some information about the Thieves Guild and about the black market. If you're a member you must know the people that trade there." Roland started with an explanation of his problem. He made Lobelia aware that he was looking into the black market for trading. He wanted to know which of the merchants were somewhat trustworthy and for what he needed to watch out for. It was clear that he made a mistake by looking like a fish out of water the first time he was there. Thankfully the only people that came for him were guild members that he could handle. Normal people would probably not be able to fight off 3 Tier 2 ruffians in a narrow corridor as he did. Lobelia started listing down the guild's secrets without going into too much detail. She also made it clear that as a guild member she was somewhat limited to what she could say. This was similar to the contracts with the debuffs, though here on the other side the Thieves Guild used more drastic measures with curses. If she started listing the names of the leaders she would find herself affected by some kind of flesh-eating curse. The only way to get rid of this high-level curse was to move up in the ranks and become one of the trusted members. Becoming a Tier 3 class holder was one of the ways of getting rid of it for good. There was also nothing limiting the Thieves Guild members from traveling. They were mostly free but just couldn't talk about the guild to non-members. While their lips were sealed when talking about the more intricate secrets with outsiders, this didn't keep them from discussing it among other members. Luckily Roland had acquired the black merchant emblem, which would allow Lobelia to talk about it with him without being in danger of a curse backlash. First, he got some information about the timeline. The underground had not been there for long, as the construction had been started a few months ago. The black market had not even existed for longer than a month, and he was informed that it was still in its infancy. "Is that so? Do you know any merchants that could take more specific custom orders? Is such a thing possible?" "I don't see why not. The black market isn't really that much different than the one above ground. Perhaps the disputes are handled differently." "How so?" "There was less bureaucracy down there and the guild didn't care about keeping the peace as much. All the black merchants paid taxes to the guild and mostly had to also use their own bodyguards for protection. This was also why he was singled out from the crowd as a potential robbery target. Even if he went back to complain, he would only be laughed out by the guild top brass. Then he would probably get robbed by them for being a bother. The talk continued for a bit till it went back to the black market. There Lobelia mentioned a name that he was familiar with. I should trade with Skeek. Definitely, those rat people like shiny things like metal and sparkly ores, that's what you are looking for, right? If you ask him to get you something, he probably will. I wouldn't really get involved with the other merchants, most of them are crooks. You better watch out, a lot of them will try to sell you counterfeit goods. It was a bit strange to hear someone that tried to rob him call others crooks, but apparently Skeeks was the person he should invest his time in. The biggest downside of this whole black market deal was that he would need to do it himself. It would be hard to get Bernier down there without some protection. You said that a merchant needs protection down there, otherwise they could be picked off like me today, right? Lobelia nodded while Roland rubbed his chin and looked at her with intent. While he could probably go down there without protection, this wasn't the same for others. Bernier would be able to get him the required items if he had the right guide. Think I heard enough. Will you keep your word? About not telling it to Elydia? Are you sure you can keep up this lie? Roland didn't want to pry too much in, but if he was in Elydia's shoes he would like to know about his little sister's involvement in the Thieves Guild. From his standpoint, the girl was probably afraid that she would be banned from participating in the Thieves Guild activities. She wouldn't understand. We need the money, and even if it does look bad, I promise that I haven't killed anyone. Roland recalled the bowmanship that Elydia performed. It didn't seem that she was aiming for a killing blow, the intent was to injure and not to kill. This didn't mean that he was fine with what she was doing. This world was different than his old one. His old morals didn't really apply to people that were starving and living in poverty. It was easy to tell someone not to steal, but when family and friends were on the line, the lines of what was right and wrong became blurred. I won't tell her, but on one condition. Lobelia perked up at the first part of the sentence, but her brows furrowed the moment the latter part was mentioned. Yes, you do remember Bernier, right? You mean that perverted drunk? Yes, that does sound like him. What I would like you to do is... Roland started giving his terms. There wasn't really much that he wanted. Elydia was only supposed to act as Bernier's bodyguard whenever he needed her to be. If he had a member from the Thieves Guild on his side, there would be no problem in sending him to get materials. She would also be tasked with showing him around. The whole underground life was very new to him. It would be good to figure out how things worked and how he could use it to his advantage. This was a very critical moment in his life as he was expanding his knowledge, and wealth would come with it. If he could get some protection via the local mafia, then it might be a good idea to lose some gold. But if it was worth the hassle was the big question here. From what his friend here told him, the Thieves Guild did make contracts with outsiders. If he could trade some money for their protective services and not be ripped off, then it might be a good idea. Until he got an operational golem and tower defensive system, this could save him some trouble. The biggest problem here was trust that he did not really have. Would these thieves keep their end of the bargain, or would they try to squeeze him for more and more cash? Would they actually get involved if he got attacked, or would they just ignore his plight when the time came to act? I could do that, but how long would that take? It would be best if we didn't need to go there too much. Is once every 2 weeks fine? Lobelia nodded at the request and they shook on it. They agreed to meet up later and she would show him the ropes. Now it was time to head home as it was already nighttime. If he showed his face, the guards would let him leave as they knew him well. I hope this won't be more trouble than it's worth. I need to get stronger. Roland gave out a sigh while walking towards the city gates. While it seemed that he would be able to get some crafting materials, working with the black market was still not something he was looking towards. Chapter 157 Runic Emporium. There, will you get off my back now? This will do. A certain large, bald guild master was frowning while looking at a smaller dwarf. Both of them didn't seem to like each other, but they were in the process of signing a contract. The two dwarves were the same that Roland had seen a few days ago, and they were now looking over some signed documents. Good, now stop price gouging my stores. Ya don't need to worry, dwarves, I follow a contract. Ordhan gave out a snort while watching the two bearded men leave his office. He glanced at the written contracts one more time before remembering a certain runesmith that he once employed. The kid should be fine. His eyes soon turned to a different kind of parchment. It looked somewhat strange as the paper was black as coal while the writing was white instead. Seems he had a little run-in with the locals though. Guildmaster, can I come in? Without answering back, Ordhan glanced at the piece of paper. In a matter of seconds, it went up in flames after he injected a tiny bit of his own mana. Come in. A certain young woman with glasses and her hair up walked into the room. Ordhan nodded at her while handing her the contract that he signed with the dwarves. It would have to be stored down in the vault together with all the other contracts the guild had made. You can leave now, that will be all. He noticed that this guild receptionist had been taking interest in this whole case. Even now he noticed that she took a longer glance at the piece of paper. This was somewhat out of character as she was normally somewhat more professional. Is there something going on between those two? Well, not like it matters. Ordhan pulled out an empty piece of paper. This little shop enterprise that he created might have gone under, but this didn't mean that the work was done. Even though he wouldn't be able to undercut the dwarven magic items, he still had other venues he could profit from. Then there still was the Dark Horse, Wayland the runesmith. It seemed that he had followed through with his advice and would be remaining in the city even with the dwarven resistance. Ordhan knew how those drunks operated, and they would certainly not get involved with the black market merchants. From his perspective, both the regular market and black market were the same thing, one just had fewer restrictions. Time to get back to work. While the guild master was busy with his own business, Bummer and Dunan were walking back to their workshop. The two were quite happy about how they managed to handle the issue with the runesmith. Thinking that the young human had no right to delve into something their ancestors were known for was enough to justify the actions that they took. That should day it. Dunan said to Bummer while walking through the large iron door of their headquarters. The moment they entered, they could feel the heat going up. Inside were various other dwarven craftsmen hammering away at various metals, shaping them into swords and axes. "Do ya think that Iman will come to us? If he does, we'll just send him awa, we don't need him around here." Dunan replied to Bummer, and the two soon went on their own way. While the two had the highest levels from the smiths here, they were still young craftsmen with a lot of pride. This debacle had already taken away from their own work, and now with it being done, they wanted to concentrate on their own craft. Thus the two delved into their own private workshops that were dug into this large building. Dwarves like to operate underground while being surrounded by heavy machinery and heat. The sound of hammers was like music to them, and being intoxicated while working was just part of the course. A day turned into a week, and then a month had passed. This was the time for their monthly meeting to discuss how the Albrook project was underway. "Can we get this hour, am needin' to finish that set o' arms?" Dunan said in a grumpy voice while the group of dwarves sat down around a table. While he looked a bit annoyed, the others weren't saying much. "What's wrong we yet? Did your mums die or something?" "Na, we just had word about Amon runesmith, he is actually expanding and building a shop. It doesn't look he is struggling at all." One of the dwarves that was responsible for gathering information spoke up. Dunan was the last one to come to the meeting, so he was not informed about this information. From the reports that they were given, the human runesmith was close to finishing building his workshop. "Impossible, did he have more coin than we anticipated? Building a damn shop and stocking it up shouldn't be this easy. Did th guild lie to us? Or I helping him get by?" Dunan asked while the other dwarf shrugged. "We checked, it doesn't seem like he is getting help from other sources." The dwarves didn't just let this slide. The moment they noticed that Wayland was doing fine, they investigated. Their informants stated that neither Wayland nor his assistant was getting anything from the marketplace. The people that they knew, like the other shop owners, were not helping them either. He was getting his resources from an unknown place. Either someone is providing him metal or he is using some old stock to get by. Say we hold and see. Bummer spoke out this time around. Knowing well that it would be hard to compete with runic items with a runesmith, he didn't see a way of pricing him out of business. While he could go for the lower level adventurers, the ones with a lot of money would not skimp out on good gear. Their lives were on the line and they knew that paying a bit more was better than being dead. There was also the perception of price to quality that was attributed to magical weapons that Bummer knew existed. If he lowered the prices of his enchanted items, people would think that there was something wrong with them. Thus, before acting, they decided to wait. More information was needed. They sure do work fast in this world. Roland stood before the new building that had been created in a bit over a month's time. It looked like a nice small brick cottage with a slanted roof that made it look like a pointy triangle. There was a large round window on the upper floor where the attic was it. This place was now empty and still required furniture that would be arriving soon. He wasn't sure what he would do with the attic that could be accessed by an extendable ladder. The space up there had enough room for someone to sleep, or it could serve as a storage facility. The store was built into the wall that was going around Roland's house. It wasn't that far from the main gate, and behind it was an additional storage where most of the goods would be placed. The plan was to place the less costly items up on the display while the good stuff was placed in the back. This would keep people from touching dangerous runic weapons that could blast a hole through his store. Well, there she is. What a beaut! She. Roland looked to Bernier, that eyes were sparkling. It seemed that his assistant was happier than even he was that this store had been built. While Roland was somewhat happy that he could make this, it was just the beginning of his journey. For him, it wasn't really about building a store and more about being free. This store and company that he was trying to create was in place so that he could be independent of others. His true wish was just to someday relax without feeling the impending doom coming from all directions. You come up with a name for it yet? Name? Hey. Roland looked at the spot above the large wooden entrance door. There he saw nothing besides the brick wall. Soon he would need to place a sign that would give the people an idea about what was inside. He also intended to put a sign at the road where the adventurers were heading towards the dungeon. It would point them in the direction of this store with the promise of high-quality runic items. These items would range all the way from weapons to his mapping orb that he also intended to sell for a hefty sum. With some work on the orb's inner workings, he hoped to include a smart mapping system that would work somewhat like a GPS. With a lack of satellites, though, he needed to figure out a different way of keeping track of the person holding it. Maybe in the future, he could build some kind of tower that gathered some signals and helped him map the whole dungeon, but that would need to wait. How about we just call it the Runic Shop? That's a bit too simple. Shouldn't it be something grand like the godly Rune Forge? Rune Forge? It's not a forge, it's just a store for runic items. Roland went back and forth with Bernier as his assistant was resolute in giving the store a good name. Roland, on the other hand, didn't want to be too cheeky with the naming sense, as it might give the customers the wrong idea. There was still a need for something catchy that would bring the people over with an idea in their head that they would be getting some high-quality runic items. I guess Wayland's Runic Emporium should do the trick. After going through the shops in this city and the others, he noticed that everyone seemed to put their name in front of it. With that in mind, he decided on something that would encompass a larger range of runic wares than just armor and weapons. Emporium. I know, it's somewhat small to be called an emporium, but didn't you say that I should think big? Roland gave Bernier a pat on the shoulder while heading out of the store. It had a large reinforced door that was hard to close due to its weight. Now comes the hard part. There was still some time before this place became ready to receive customers. First, it needed to be furnished, and he needed to place something shiny behind those reinforced windows that could take a gunshot. Then the next important part would be getting the right people to work here. He was slowly running low on funds, but he was able to sell some protective trinkets down at the black market. Due to his moral compass, he didn't feel like selling deadly daggers would be the correct way of proceeding there. The black market was there to help him get the base materials for his wares, but not for him to fold it with weapons meant for killing. Instead, he chose to buy some cheap items from the goldsmith and place some barrier runes on them. While they wouldn't last much, they would be able to protect the water from a few sword strikes. "Okay boss, I'll go get the sign done." "Thanks, I'll head to the city." "Take care." Bernier and Roland parted ways. Agni was left behind to chomp on more mana stones while also training his mana skills. With how the Ruby Wolf was doing, it wouldn't be long before he could advance to a Tier 2 stage. What Roland was setting out to do today was to find some help for the store. Elydia was still someone that he would like to hire, but he didn't really have time to pay her another visit. Today would be the end of the deadline. If she didn't want the position, Roland would be forced to place a job offer and try to hire someone adequate for the position of the shop clerk. Elydia was a good pick for him, as he hoped that she could take on tasks that required more than looking good and being able to sell. He needed someone to take care of the books and also hire other staff members. Her responsibilities would be more in line with a manager status than an actual seller. In his hand, he had two pieces of paper, one a job offer for a shop clerk while the other for a guard. While he was pushing on with his golem initiative, it was far from being perfect. He needed more time before he could place metallic protectors around his land. Thus the best option was to hire some adventurers, as they did take on boring tasks like this and didn't require as much payment as professional guards. There was also something that was a requirement to have a successful business: advertising. He knew very well that if a person was fed through the day, they would sometimes develop a craving for that advertised item. While there was no internet or TV in this world, there were banners and signs. Most of the people in this world didn't really know the proper way to advertise. They usually just placed signs outside of their store and picked names associated with the items they sold in their stores. Outside of this, they sometimes placed one person outside of the shop to shout at the people passing by. This was something that he also intended to do. The way to the dungeon was free of pesky taxations, so he could place a nice large sign pointing towards his home and store. Then hiring a good girl to point the adventurers in the right direction would seal the deal. His name was already known, so he just needed to embed it in his customers further. Whenever they thought about magical items, he wanted them to think about him and his store. First thing first though. He looked at the adventurer guild that he was standing in front of and slowly entered. Inside he could see a plethora of people going back and forth. There he saw his favorite guild receptionist that he used to mostly avoid in the beginning. Now on the other hand, he much preferred going through her side as it went by much faster. As always, there was a little line that he needed to go through. This was something that he was already used to, so he just waited without making much of a fuss. Then before it was his turn, a little scene unfolded. "Hey, can't you give me a better price? These mana stones should sell for at least a few more coppers." "Sir, as I've explained, the prices of mana stones have gone down this month if you look at the price board." It seemed that she was trying to explain to an adventurer that the rates for mana stones were down. This was a normal occurrence, as they tended to fluctuate through the month. They had been on a somewhat decline the more adventurer parties formed, but not by so much that they couldn't bring in a livable wage. While normally Elydia was somewhat stone-faced without any emotion during such matters, today she looked a bit more annoyed. With his now sharpened senses, he noticed her eyebrows twitching a bit as the man continued to lean in and talk. Hygiene wasn't that great here, so Roland could only imagine how bad the man's breath was. She didn't break character though, and after some back and forth the old adventurer decided to take his money and go. He didn't look happy, and he displayed it by spitting to the side on the floor. It was finally his turn, but before he got there he saw a woman in the same receptionist get-up as Elydia approach her from the back. The two started to whisper between each other, and the other girl seemed somewhat apologetic for some reason. This was followed by more eyebrow twitches from Elydia as she turned to face him. "Ah, Mr. Wayland, how can I help you today?" While she was holding it back, Roland could tell that she was angry. He didn't really feel like it was his place to ask her about her daily life, so he decided to go with what he rehearsed earlier today.
Yes.
Did you think about my offer, Ms. Elydia? It's still open, it would be. Before he could continue and list some perks of being his employee, Elydia decided to slam her hands on the counter and look at him with wide eyes. I accept. And I could offer you a free hey, you accept? He was baffled by her reply, and this was noticed by some other people in the guild. Mostly her co-workers looked at her in astonishment with wide eyes. It seemed that Roland had gotten his second worker, now together with Bernier he would have 2 people to command. Chapter 158 Foggy Future. Was that really the right decision? Elydia was standing outside of the Adventurer Guild. She wanted to hit her head against the wall after recalling what had happened not so long ago. After having spent a whole day dealing with pesky adventurers that just didn't understand how the prices of mana stones could change, she was tired. Then a co-worker appeared out of nowhere asking her to stay a couple of hours more as she had something important to take care of. Elydia knew well that this was untrue and that the girl would be down at the local tavern having fun with her friends. This has not been the first time, but Elydia always needed the money, so she didn't care much about the excuses. That is until a better deal arrived at her doorstep. Why did I have to agree when everyone was watching? She grabbed her hair while looking down on the ground while not knowing what got into her. The moment he walked over to her counter, she had lost it. All the stress from this work that had been building up caused her to lose her composure for the faintest of moments. So then she took him up on the offer while everyone watched. It would be hard to go back on her statement. The people from the guild had been there along with Solana that heard it all. Ms. Elydia, is everything all right? A manly voice that should not belong to a 17-year-old called out to her. There he was, the handsome runesmith that was on the helm of her current troubles. While the offer that he was giving her was quite good, she wasn't sure if the man could deliver on the promises. Elydia was quite aware of the debacle that he was going through with the Dwarven Union. In her opinion, the best move for him would be to either leave the city or find some common ground with the dwarves. No news of him ever attempting any diplomatic resolution ever reached the guild, so it seemed that Wayland was quite stubborn, just as the dwarves that he was going up against. Oh, I'm fine, Mr. Wayland, glad that you waited for me to finish. That's fine, I understand that making such a decision wouldn't be easy. I'm glad that you have decided to take me up on my offer. We can write up a proper contract in a few days, that is if you are fine with it. She spaced out for a moment as Wayland continued to talk. Things seemed that they were advancing rapidly, and that was not something that she liked. Elydia wasn't very prone to taking risks, and while working for an aspiring runesmith could be lucrative, a steady job at the Adventurers Guild was much safer. Ah yes, the contract. She paused a little bit as contracts were kind of a specialty. There was a possibility of getting a good deal, but she didn't think Wayland would go through the trouble of signing a one-sided contract that favored her. Great, I've already got one ready, I'll give you a copy tomorrow. Then I'll be counting on you from now, Ms. Elydia. Soon Wayland was off to go somewhere while Elydia was left standing beside the street. It was the first time that she said no to a co-worker that was now stuck working the longer hours. The shock on the young girl's face was something new that she was not used to. While thinking about her own future, she returned home to the orphanage. As always, it was quite loud and the kids were playing with some other young adults that came over from time to time. Lobelia and Armand had their own cliques that they tended to hang out with, and these two were people that the half-elf knew. Rennie, Jasper, thank you for keeping the children company. While she was grateful that there was some outside help, Elydia wasn't so sure about these two young men. They seemed somewhat sketchy, but Lobelia vouched for their morals, so she let it be. She could only hope that they wouldn't go down a bad road while taking a couple of her children along with them. Leave it to us, Elydia. I hope you weren't teaching them anything strange though. Elydia glanced at something that looked like a lockpick in Jasper's hand. The young man quickly moved it into his pocket while whistling. Don't worry, big sis, I'll keep them in line. I hope, for your sake. Elydia narrowed her eyes while glancing at Lobelia. These two half-beastmen were proper adventurers, but she did not have the opportunity to glance at their adventure cards. Sometimes they joined Armand and Lobelia during their dungeon runs, but she knew that the two were only here due to her younger sister. "Oh hey, I heard about the big news, are you really quitting from the guild?" Lobelia was quick to change the topic as she was getting cornered in a spot by Elydia. It seemed that rumors were already spreading. Her younger sister had always been good at gathering information, it was as if she was doing it for a living. "Who told you that?" "Oh, a little bird told me." "But isn't it great? I think working for Wayland might be a great change of pace. You have been looking tired lately, just look at those bags under your eyes, you must start taking care of yourself." Elydia was taken aback by Lobelia's reply. She didn't seem to be aware of the problems that may arise by her leaving her steady post at the Adventurers Guild. Before she could bring that up, Lobelia walked over and gave her a big hug. "Don't worry about us or the kids, we can take care of ourselves, do what you want to do, also stop being so stiff, big sis." The two soon parted and it became quite loud as the kids zoomed in on the adults. The kids started chasing after Lobelia while laughing. Elydia could just smile and give it to her younger sister. She still felt responsible for this whole house, but the paycheck that Wayland was offering seemed enticing. Her only gripe was the uncertainty of him lasting in this hostile environment. "Is it true? Did that bastard really propose to you?" "What are you talking about? Are you drunk again?" After half an hour, Armand decided to show his face. It was dinner time and everyone was ready to dig in. Apparently, the muscle brain had heard some rumors about Wayland proposing to Elydia in the guild and her accepting in an instant. "I did accept, but it..." "You did? This can't be happening, so it really was true. Maybe if I get him when he isn't wearing that blasted armor I can beat some sense into him." "Good luck with that, P-Brain, I'd put my money on Wayland." "I second that." Third. Rennie and Jasper were still here while munching on some homemade stew. It seemed that for some reason they thought Wayland would not have much trouble in taking care of Armand. "Why, you little shits! Calm down, Armand, no one is getting married. Mr. Wayland just offered me a job at the new shop that he is making, nothing is set in stone and I haven't left the guild yet." She had to slam her hand down on the table to break up a fight from happening. Most of the time when those two went against Armand, the three ended up in a fight. The big brute always came up on top though, so she was more worried about the two half-beast boys. "Wouldn't it be fine though?" "I'm just saying, would it be bad if you married Wayland?" "What are you even saying?" Elydia replied to Lobelia that raised this question after finishing her meal. "What would you want that bastard to?" Armand raised his fist at Lobelia that just started whistling. "What's the problem? You do know that he is loaded, all of our problems would go out the window if Big Sis got together with him." Elydia smirked while looking at Lobelia that was at a loss for words. It looked like her little sister was mostly interested in Wayland's monetary value and not really the person behind it. "He isn't bad looking, is tall and has money. Maybe I should go for him if you aren't interested." The half-elf grinned at Elydia, showing off those pearly whites. It was clear that she raised this in a mocking tone, but as soon as she did, the two half-beast men jumped into the conversation. "No, you mustn't." "Yeah, you can't do that." Lobelia just gave out another sigh as the people in the room started to shout at each other again. It was clear to her that her younger sister should realize the feelings of these two boys before she ever thought about marrying anyone. She had to worry about her own future though. Her younger sister for some reason thought it was a good idea to switch professions and that Wayland would be making a lot of money in the future. People that could create magical items were said to be able to bring in a lot of money. But most of the time they ended up contractually obligated to large conglomerates like the Dwarven Union and forced like her to work long hours. Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to sign up with someone like that. He certainly looked like he was driven by something. For one reason or another, an image of a smiling Wayland with her and the kids popped into her head. She was making some food in a large house and a pricey ring adorned one of her fingers. "What am I even thinking about? She quickly shook herself back to reality and looked over to Lobelia that was egging Armand and the other two men on. "Stop shouting and help me clean, all of you." Well, that went better than expected. Roland was back at his house and looking at a stack of papers. Since he had been employed several times and had other contracts to look through, it wasn't that hard to formulate his own. People in this world worked a lot longer than in his previous one. No one really went with the 8-hour workday and free weekend variant here. People were lucky to even get one day off in a week. Due to this, the workforce was mostly populated by men while the women remained at home to take care of the kids. This made what Elydia was doing seem like madness, as she was trying to be both the man of the house and also the mother. Not like that was his problem, he had to focus on creating a good contract that would put too much strain on himself. Even though Elydia agreed at the moment, he wasn't so sure if she was truly convinced yet. If the contract wasn't good enough, he feared that she would go back to the guild. "I don't really need to keep the store running for the whole week." Roland felt that the market for the runic weapons wasn't that large and that the adventurers would wait for the right product. He did not want to be stuck around his workshop for the entire week, so closing for the weekend was something that he wanted to do. In those 2 days, he could do other things like visit the dungeon to level up and gather more resources. With the store open, he felt like he needed to remain close to the goods. The first reason was for safety, as he wasn't sure if anyone would come to cause trouble. He could see people like the Dwarven Union hiring thugs to go mess up his store. Bernier, on the other hand, said that the dwarves would probably not do something like that. Surprisingly, his race, being money-hungry as it is, despised doing things in a non-business way. While they were fine with undercutting prices, buying out land and stores of their competition, they would not hire people from the Thieves Guild. Roland, on the other hand, was now working together with the black market merchants. He had even spoken with Lobelia and her two friends if there was a way to guarantee that his business would not be targeted by higher-level thieves. The people that attacked his home while Bernier was home alone had not been part of this Thieves Guild. They were apparently just passing by and wanted to escape before giving the guild in this town their cut. There were actually some strange rules between these thieves. If a person from another Thieves Guild came to a city, they would need to pay a few of their earnings to the guild in town. Of course, they could try to skip town but would be put on the blacklist and hunted down if they ever returned to the city the guild was placed in. Not everyone agreed with the ways the Thieves Guild did their things, and a lot depended on their guild master. Thus some of the thieves liked to work alone or in small groups and were seen more like bandits. To his surprise, Lobelia mentioned that there were some ways, but it would cost quite a bit. The only real way of getting proper protection from the Thieves Guild would be going and speaking with the guild master. Due to how well that went with the other guild master, Roland didn't feel like it would be good to go speak with one that was probably a Tier 3 class holder and unhinged from any specific rules against killing. Lobelia did give him a tip to go around this without having to involve the guild master. Though it might not work, it would be good to hire someone from the Thieves Guild as protection. They would be able to monitor what was happening in the guild and tell him if any jobs were posted to steal something from him. He was wondering if he should give some pocket change to the half-elf and maybe her two friends for that reason. Though he wasn't sure if he could trust any of them. Maybe while her big sister works here, Lobelia will be more inclined to help me out. With that thought, he looked at the plans of his shop. While it wasn't that big at the moment and not that many items would fit into it at the moment, there was room for expansion. He purposely placed it at the beginning of his fence so that he could build in more sections later. This would of course depend on his monetary gain, but he hoped to add more sections to create a large store. With enough space, he could place items by a specific category: armors in one part, weapons in another, magical runic bathtubs in the other. With enough time and money, he hoped to create a proper magical store that was similar to the one he worked back in Edelgard. While he did live outside the city boundaries, this didn't mean that he wouldn't need to pay any taxes. Just like anyone else in the city, he would need to properly register his building. This might have sounded like a long process that required a lot of paperwork, but it didn't. There were no institutions that checked if the building was safe to work in and if there was a fire exit. Here a business owner was only required to pay a flat sum each month that was proportional to the store size. Once per year, a person wouldn't be tasked to go over the items that were being sold and through the store's ledgers. There was a requirement to keep records of what was being sold, but it was not as detailed as it was back in his old world. While there was some leeway, most people were not crazy enough to try and cheap out on the kingdom. If it was found that a person was evading taxes and withholding information, it was jail time or even death. I'm glad I have someone like Elydia to help me out with that part. Hope those pesky dwarves finally leave me alone, only time will tell. Roland gave out a sigh while returning to his planning. When he finally got Elydia to sign this new contract, he could shove some responsibilities on her shoulders, as his were already somewhat buckling under the stress. Chapter 159 Early Customers. We have really improved, haven't we? Yes, at first I was worried when you proposed that stupid idea, but we did manage. What do you mean stupid idea? Those troglodytes didn't stand a chance. Yeah, because Sansa was smart enough to get some of those explosive magical scrolls. A familiar-looking group of 4 adventurers walked out from the Albrook dungeon. All of them were smiling as they had gone through quite the large battle. It was clever to place them at the spot they would fall in. We took out half of them with just a few scrolls. This group of steel-grade adventurers thought back to the battle. Once before they triggered a trap which caused them to be almost wiped out. If not for a certain person saving them by pelting the monsters with runic spells, they would be long dead. This time around, after some time had passed and they had managed to level up, they decided to pay that room a visit. The monsters proved a lot easier to defeat now, and with so many bodies they would make quite the penny from all the materials. With all the money we get from those mana stones and monster parts, we will be able to relax for a while. You want to spend it all on booze again, don't you, Rudy? The red-haired boy flinched a bit as his scheme was quickly discovered. With all the materials they would be set for a month or 2 if they didn't spend it all. Stop being an idiot, now is the time to invest. We are all approaching level 50, we need to invest in our gear. I propose that we spend it on new weapons and armor. What's wrong with our weapons, Kira? I bet it can last us all the way till silver grade. If you think that little sword will do you any good against the lower level monsters, then you are more of a muscle brain than I thought. Kira is right, we only managed to kill those monsters because of the magic scrolls. You should understand the importance of good equipment by now. Rudy, the red-haired youth, looked to the other girl and started frowning. Not you too, Sansa. Hey Myron, you say something. He turned to the largest person in the group, another youth in half-plate armor that was clearly all scratched up and dented in a couple of places. While the group was talking, he was looking over a hole in his shield. I don't know, Rudy, I think the girls are right this time around. Rudy started looking over everyone. It was true that they had been using old weapons and armor that they had gotten after ranking up into steel-grade adventurers. After going through the dungeon, their gear wasn't looking that good. We should have bought them earlier, there was a big discount at the stores. The group went silent as all of them knew that they were at fault. While Rudy spent most of it on drinking, the girls did put it into jewelry and new clothes. Then there was Myron that liked to indulge in excessive eating. We don't need to feel down, even if the prices have gone up, they are just the same as they were before. Kira smiled while cheering everyone on as she tried to shift the conversation in a different direction. Kira is right, no use worrying about it now, we have some money and we can just go into that chamber to get more. Rudy replied as he intended to farm the lizard man-looking monsters for their parts as much as he could. Sansa, on the other hand, shook her head as she found a small problem with that reasoning. It won't be that easy, I'm all out of those exploding scrolls. Can't you just get more? I wish, for some reason, I haven't seen them being sold anywhere, it's as if they stopped making them. They were also runic scrolls, but they didn't cost that much over the enchanted ones. Sansa replied to Rudy as they entered the road leading towards Albrook. The girl was worried as the scrolls were somewhat special. They exploded the moment a monster stepped on them, which made them perfect as traps. They could even be hidden under some dirt and would require a small jolt of mana to activate. Is that so? Come to think of it, I did try to look up some magical short swords but they were all enchanted ones that the dwarves make. I saw some other ones at the other shops a month or so ago. Kira replied to Sansa while the two thought that it was strange that most of the runic wares started vanishing from the store shelves. They saw an influx of them when a certain runesmith appeared in town but it seemed that they had been bought out and now none remained. Runic, enchanted or empowered, it's all the same to me. Rudy on the other hand just shrugged as he didn't really care about where the magical items came from. The two girls from the party gave out a sigh as they were aware of the differences between each item that he had listed. The group continued to walk towards the city while discussing their finances. While they divided their earnings between themselves equally, they were still a team. All of them needed to keep up with each other to not drag everyone behind. This was the same for their items that required an update. All of them were close to reaching the 50th level and this would grant them access to Tier 2 classes. Then they would be able to take the guild exam towards the silver grade. Being a silver grade adventurer started meaning something and mostly all of them were known to use some sort of magical item. It was a requirement as the gap between people and monsters started to grow. Without the proper weapons, it would be impossible to defeat increasingly more resistant monsters. There was always a high price attached to these weapons but they would make life easier for them. While their thoughts were riddled with new shiny magical weapons they noticed something that wasn't there before. Around halfway towards the city, they saw a large sign that was not there before. What is this? Wayland's Runic Emporium. Rudy read the bright red text that was on the wooden boards. It was clearly an and under the store's name was a short description along with an arrow pointing towards a narrow dirt road that led into the forest. For all your runic needs please visit Wayland's Runic Emporium. Kira read part of the slogan which had a list of services that this magic store gave. Apparently, they repaired runic items for cheap and also sold various runic related items. This quickly piqued the interest of this small group of adventurers as they were just looking for magical items to buy. Mr. Wayland made a store and is accepting customers. Kira clapped her hands while smiling and looking over to the other girl in the party. Both of them nodded at each other while the two men frowned. Mr. Rudy lowered his voice as he was not fond of the fact that Kira was being so formal towards this runesmith. He knew him after being rescued and then saw him again at that presentation. Ever since he tried his best to rise to the occasion but it seemed that the girls in his party were still interested in that peculiar man. Something wrong? Kira asked while looking at Rudy who shook his head as he did not want to seem like the jealous type. We should go check it out. Maybe we can find something good there. You want to go now? We just got back from the dungeon, shouldn't we go to the guild and drop these monster parts off? Rudy pointed to Myron, who had a large backpack. It was a standard spatial bag that normally porters wore but without having much money and being stingy they decided to carry it around themselves. Thanks to it, they didn't have to suffer through the smell of monster remains. HOH? It's rare that you propose something sensible for a change. What's that supposed to mean? Rudy recoiled after Kira called him stupid in a roundabout way. Both the girls started laughing but then nodded. Then, how about you and Myron go to the guild while me and Sansa check the new store out? Both of the young men looked at each other and then back to the two girls. The moment they turned their heads they could see them skipping towards the forest. Rudy and Myron just nodded at each other before following behind as they were worried what could come of this visit to the runesmith. A few minutes later all of them found themselves inside the forest. They walked through a small dirt road and found more arrows pointing in the direction of this supposed emporium. Have you ever been here before? Asked Rudy while Kira replied. No, there was never anything worthwhile but I heard one of the silver grades saying that they had their runic weapon repaired here. While the name Wayland had spread through the city no one really came around this part. To get to the house a person had to go through a somewhat dense forest. Then they would come out to an open area surrounded by unkempt farmland. For young adventurers like them, this was one of the more boring places to visit. There, think we are out I can see some buildings is that it? The group came out of the forest and the first thing that they noticed was the large walls that were surrounding something. They were quite high and mostly made from wood with barbed wire at the top parts. "What is this supposed to be?" asked Rudy. "Is this some kind of prison?" replied Myron, as he was also confused about the way this building was set up. Most of the walls were made from logs, but there was also a newer section that was made from stone. This section was connected to the large entrance gate and the brick house next to it. "That must be the shop, that emblem." Sansa started rubbing her chin while examining the store sign. It had the words Wayland's Runic Emporium as the other sign, but there was a small addition. There was a strange drawing of a sun to the side that she remembered. "Is something wrong, Sansa?" "I don't know yet, give me a moment." The girl that had a bow slung over her shoulder placed her hand into a satchel to pull out a scroll. She looked at this item and started comparing the insignia that this runic item had on it. "It's identical. Did Wayland make these scrolls?" She shared her findings with Kira before moving towards the store. They were not the only people here though, as outside the store they could see a large man. He was someone that they knew and that was somewhat infamous around the Adventurers Guild for his simplicity. "You know, make trouble, if trouble Korgok will remove." It was the large half-orc adventurer that they sometimes came across at the guild building. Most people tried to avoid half-orcs as they were seen as stupid brutes. They made great bodyguards though, as their physical stats were closer to their monster orc counterparts that they came from. All of the four instantly straightened up as they knew that they would not be able to handle this half-orc if a fight broke out. The time that he managed to catch a team of silver-grade adventurers was well known around their circles. "You don't need to worry, Mr. Korgok, I'll be sure to make them behave." Kira smiled while smacking Rudy on the back. Korgok just nodded while moving to the side. There he had a large tree stump that he could sit on. Rudy wanted to shout out but was somewhat intimidated by the large green-skinned man. Thus he just frowned at Kira that was chuckling silently behind him. The group soon entered the shop, and the moment they opened up the door a strange chime sound echoed through it. They looked at the door that they opened to see if there was a bell above it, but they didn't see anything there. It looked like the sound went off after they opened the door. It was a small gentle chime, but where it came from no one knew. On the inside, they spotted a certain woman, one that they were very familiar with. She sparked a little debate a few weeks ago as she vanished from the Adventurers Guild without a trace. "Ms. Elydia? What are you doing here? Welcome to Wayland's Runic Emporium," she called out to them. Her dress was slightly different from the uniform that the women at the Adventurers Guild were forced to wear. It made her look somewhat like a head made from a noble's estate. The glasses only made this look more prominent. "Elydia? The receptionist?" "Yes, you are correct, I work here now. Do you have some questions? If you look to the board there, we have written down a couple of rules." The other three members from the group quickly homed in on the woman as well. She was standing behind a counter with some unknown items on it. Sansa from the group noticed that there were shelves filled with certain parchments that she was familiar with. Just as she had thought, the runic scrolls that vanished from the circulation around the city were nowhere, and Wayland was the one producing them. The sign with the rules that she pointed them to laid down some ground rules. One of them was not touching the goods without asking the store clerk for it. Another one stated some rules about runic weapon repairs and the rates. "It says here that you will repair the items free of charge." "Ah yes, the first runic repair will be free. You will be given a token with your purchase that you can then use whenever you wish to get your item repaired." "Really? That's neat. Most of those old dwarves never offered something like that." Elydia nodded as Kira posed the question. It did sound nice to get one free repair with every weapon purchased. It was as if the cost of it went down by a whole small gold coin. "Can I look around? Be my guest. If you have any questions please ask me." Kira backed off for now, but was also somewhat taken back by how Elydia was acting. While she still had the resting bitch face as always, she seemed someone nicer. Her complexion had improved and she felt more genuine than the automaton that she was used to seeing back at the Adventurers Guild. At first glance, this store didn't look much different than the other stores in town. There were various cabinets through which they could see some magic daggers and swords. Some shields and armors were hung out on the walls, with the only difference being that they had many strange runes on them. All of the adventurers from the four-man party made a few rounds around the shop that wasn't either small or large. All of them met up in the middle, strange looks plastered over their faces. Excuse me, are these prices right? Kira waddled over to Elydia and posed the question while pointing at the price tags that were next to the items. Yes, that's right. Mr. Wayland decided to lower the prices for now, but I'm not sure if they will remain as such for long. Will you be buying anything? Why no, I mean. The girl looked back to the group of adventurers and they all gave her a nod before slowly walking out from the store. Please come again. Elydia looked a bit down after the party of four left the store. After the door closed she couldn't see much, but the youths started increasing their pace while shuffling towards the forest. The closer they got to the dirt road, the faster they walked. Did you see it? Yes. We need to go get money before it's too late. Kira shouted out while the group of four bolted towards the city. Myron, move your ass faster, we need to get those runic weapons, I never saw any at that price before. Myron clenched his teeth while running as fast as he could while wearing his half-plate armor. The backpack he was wearing was still somewhat heavy and it had all of their gains from this dungeon run. They needed to sell first before they could buy the gear they wanted. Sansa, go ahead and reserve a spot in line for us, we need to act fast, if word spreads that Wayland is selling those things for so little we won't be able to get anything. The group's archer nodded as she sprinted forward. The group of youths all had panicked looks on their faces, but there was also a twinkle of joy. In their heads, they already pictured themselves with magical weapons that they could never afford. They knew the reason, but they also knew that this opportunity was fleeting. They needed to quickly return with a purse filled with coins before it was too late. Chapter 160 Back in Business. What was that? Roland called out while peeking his head out of the entrance to the attic. He clearly saw them slowly increasing their walking speed before bolting into the forest as if they were being chased by some large monster. I'm not sure, but I think they will be back, replied Elydia while also looking out through the window. You think so? Roland asked while going down the ladder that led up into the attic. He had brought up some wares like runic scrolls that would probably be quite popular. Down on the main floor, he looked a bit disappointed after the four had left. They were actually the first customers that arrived here. I think we will be having a lot of customers soon, the word just needs to spread around town. Elydia continued talking while going through the store and checking if everything was in order. It had been a week since she had been hired and the contract had been signed. The two went back and forth on it, but after a few days, they were finally able to decide on the right hourly wages. With her help, he started getting the store in order. Thanks to her expertise in sales, she helped him prepare the placement of the items. There was not much stock to go around, but Roland managed to scrape by with some runic weapons and Bernier added his own armors that he had upgraded with some runes. Roland was also sure to produce his old specialty, runic scrolls. With him being the store owner, he could lower the price far enough to compete with even the lowest discount prices that the dwarves could offer. He knew that at least when it came to magical wares in the city he had the advantage over the bushy-beard competition. After months of preparation and getting materials from the black market merchant, he had enough stock to open up. For now, he focused on lesser spells like sharpness, impact, and strengthening to produce more newbie-friendly items. He knew that the dungeon was still being swarmed by newer adventurers. These could not afford exotic wares with powerful Tier 2 runes. Thus he focused most of his time on the steel and silver adventurer demographic for now. Maybe if he gained enough notoriety he could push towards the gold rankers. It was actually surprising to be visited by this group as the billboard was placed just an hour ago. Together with Bernier he went over to the fork in the road and placed it there without expecting much. It was already the middle of the day, so he didn't expect anyone to shop up this fast, if you think so. Roland nodded as he took Elydia's words to heart. The woman knew her way around the Adventurer Guild, so she probably knew what they were after. If she thought they would come, then they would come. Speaking of the shop opening, Do you think that those kids will be all right? They will be fine. Lobelia is with them. I must thank you again for giving that offer. This will be a good learning experience for the little ones. Elydia bowed her head before Roland as a thank you, which made him recoil awkwardly to the gesture. He had come up with the idea to distribute flyers through the city and thought that utilizing the orphans from Elydia's home would be adequate. For a small price, they would go around the city and hand out some flyers. While this world had some advancements, there weren't that many when it came to printing. There were some stores with something akin to printing presses, but instead of them, skills were being used. A high-level scribe could actually output a similar performance to a printing press, as they had a peculiar skill. It was a skill that allowed them to use some mana to copy writings or even drawings from paper. While Roland had a similar class in the form of Runic mana scribe, it was just a tier 1 class. He was unable to learn this skill as it would require an advanced tier 2 version of this class. Then if a person went even further, they could write almost as fast as a modern-day printer. This was quite interesting to Roland, as it showed him that people were prioritizing skill advancements over machines. They didn't see a purpose in creating advanced printing presses, as a person could just produce better effects if they leveled up further. Classes like scribes also could be leveled quite fast, as it wasn't a battle class. The more they copied and the more they wrote, the more experience points they gathered. Thus the printing press was pushed to the side after people realized that they weren't really required. He as well needed to hire one of these high-level scribes, as his writing speed wasn't up to par. The only thing he performed was the initial flyer with the text and little drawing of his runic emblem that he used. Thanks to his wares being already known and the sun mark being associated with him, it would probably aid in him getting more customers. You don't need to thank me, I just thought the kids would do a better job. This wasn't anything new. In his old world, odd jobs like this were left to younger adults that were still going to school. They didn't require much payment and they just needed to stand around in a popular area and give out the flyers. Most of the time the piece of paper would be scrapped, but if one person from then looked over it and decided to show up, it was more than enough. Well, I'll be in the workshop, just give me a signal if you need anything. Do you need me to explain it to you again? Yes, I just need to put my finger on one of these and then inject a bit of my mana, right? That's right. Elydia had a plate made from metal under the counter. It had several circular indentations on it to place her finger. Depending on where she was pressing her finger during the activation, a different message would be sent to Roland. While he wanted to do nothing more than to produce a telephone system, it was a bit of a hassle. This was the best way to get some information through without him needing to use a crystal ball that required a bit more mana to run. His clerk had a few options to choose from. One was somewhat a panic button that would cause the store to give out an alarm and also signal him. Some other ones would tell him that there were some difficult customers around and that he needed to come over. On the other end, in his workshop, Roland had placed a little console with color patterns. Depending on which one lit up, he would get the information through. For now, this would be the communication method. When he had more time, he would try to come up with a proper solution that would mimic modern-day phones. This world already had crystal balls that showed a picture and sound, he just needed to alter it to his needs. Maybe later in the future, he could figure out a recording feature. Be sure to call me if something happens. I will, but I think Korgik should be able to handle himself. Elydia nodded while Roland finally left through the back. Korgik was the person who came up to him after seeing the guard duty offer. He was quite surprised by this half-orc's decision, but he supposedly liked work that didn't require him moving that much. He asked Elydia about it and she confirmed this. Korgik was somewhat forced by the guild master to participate in the previous expedition. Apparently, he loved nothing more than to laze around and drink. Working as a guard at a store instead of going down into the dungeon was much easier. Even when the pay was lower, if the half-orc had enough for food and drink, he was fine. This was quite the opportunity for Roland, as the large brute was quite strong. He would be able to take care of most assailants. Only gold rank adventurers and above would pose a threat to him. Even with a competent bodyguard, Roland wasn't confident in his defenses. He started reinforcing the walls around his home, and in the future, it would start looking more like a medieval fortress than a farmhouse outside the woods. Now back in his workshop, he was looking over a new prototype. It looked like a long cylinder with a lot of small sticks connected to the top part. Besides the small pointy things coming out of it, it possessed a couple of matte gems stuck between them. This made it look like a shiny cactus, but was in actuality a new prototype of a weapon. After taking a good look over it, he nodded and took it outside. There he placed it down on the ground. A cable with some power was connected by him before he left it in place. This should do it. Even after connecting it to his power cable that went to his generator, the cylinder didn't start doing anything. Which was what was expected. The real test would be carried out now. Roland walked away a small distance from his newest creation. There he had a basket with some small sacks filled with grain. When he held one in his hand, it was about the size of it and it had weight to it. First, he took out something that looked similar to the remote he used on his golem. With the help of the kitty professor, he figured out a way to remotely activate his runes. As long as they were connected to a power source like his runic generator, they would be able to be turned on remotely. Thus the strange cylinder's surface started shining and Roland could see the runes being activated. With the device's activation, he could proceed with the test. Thus he finally threw the bag filled with grain towards it and waited to see if his new creation would work as intended. At first, it didn't seem like anything happened, but soon a blue light escaped from one of the protruding poles. It connected with the spot where the sack was thrown. Not only one of the stakes started shining, as more of them lit up the moment the bag aligned with them. Good, it's working as intended. From Roland's perspective, it looked like the little poles that were stuck in the cylinder activated the moment the sack of grains went into their line of sight. The blue light was just a harmless little bright beam to show Roland that the device could see the moving item and was activating as intended. This was a small prototype of a turret, and it would become much bigger when he created a proper one. The little thin poles would be replaced by larger ones, each of them containing an attack spell that would activate whenever something aligned with it. Roland hoped to construct an active turret that would be able to move around and target on its own accord. This wasn't such an easy task to perform, as he would need to create a custom system to guide its movement. The easier method was to just make it react to movement. Thanks to the golem eyes that he was able to produce, the turret would be able to detect movement. Then when something would come in range, it would activate one of the rods that were the closest to it. The spell would be a guided magic missile, which would compensate for the aiming. With such a rudimentary construction, he wouldn't need to worry about making it move. It could shoot in all directions, and the rods were just another version of his paddle wands that he had a lot of time to perfect. After placing a few of these in the backyard, he hoped to get rid of the dangerous mines that were everywhere. Agni, come over here, boy. Woof. His wolf gave out a loud bark which made him sound more like a domesticated dog than a proper wolf. The first thing Roland saw was a large gem on Agni's forehead that had gone through a bit of change. Name: Mystical Ruby Wolf. L50x 0%. Type: Fire/Earth/Beast. HP: 1431/1431 MP. 1533/1533 SP. 2146/2146 Strength. 50. Agility. 74. Dexterity. 40. Vitality. 60. Endurance. 65. Intelligence. 53. Willpower. 50. Charisma. 18. Luck. 15. Finally, after a lot of mana stone eating and work, Agni was able to level up his mana-related skills to level 9. This finally allowed Roland to select the next evolutionary option of a proper adult mystical ruby wolf. This time around there didn't seem to be any rarer variants, but this form was good enough. Agni's body grew in size, his body expanded to a length of about 2.5 meters. While down on the ground, his head reached up well below a full meter, and if he stood on his hind legs he would tower over his owner. This put Agni at the size of a dire wolf and made him a force to be reckoned with, as he was now a proper Tier 2 monster. Even before Roland could give his evolved pet an order, he was jumped by him. For some reason, Agni developed a liking for placing his paws on Roland's shoulders while trying to lick his face. Without the strength levels that Roland had, he would probably go down to the ground, as Agni was quite heavy for his size. The mane around his head and neck was composed of actual ruby fur that was soft to the touch while also being sturdy. His ruby tail was covered with more fur, but at the end, it split into two. "Down, boy, stop jumping on me." Agni whined a bit but then opened up his maw as he started to pant with his tongue flopping out. "Agni, I need you to run towards that thing and then back again." The wolf's ears perked up at the order and he looked to the strange metallic cactus. With a little howl, he bolted towards it and then quickly back to his master. There he stood for a moment while looking at Roland with intent in his eyes. Only when he pulled out a small mana stone to give him as a treat did the ruby wolf stop staring. "You sure have become a glutton for these." What Roland wanted to test is if the turret would activate for his tamed beast. Due to him being the creator, his mana signature was imprinted onto the device so it would not see him as an enemy. This test also proved that any tamed beasts would be marked with the same mana signature by his golems. Now he knew that he wouldn't need to worry about Agni ever being attacked by his future golemic creations. "Hey Bernier, can you come help me with something?" After a minute a friendly half-dwarf appeared that was covered in sweat and grime. "What is it, boss? Need something for the store?" "No, but I need you to move towards that device. Start by slowly walking." Roland pointed to the turret while Bernier squinted at it for a moment. He accepted the task though and started slowly walking. The moment he got in range, the glowing sticks started activating and Roland could see the lights connecting with his body. The spells being used would not cause any damage, it was just like a laser pointer. "Ack, my eye. That is if it didn't connect with a person's eyes. Then it would have a similar effect as its modern-day counterpart." "Oh, sorry about that." Roland chuckled a bit as he forgot to mention that part. Luckily this would not cause his assistant to become blind, but it was somewhat uncomfortable. "Wait, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" Bernier asked while clutching his affected eye, but after blinking a couple of times he was finally able to focus. Both of them looked at each other as they could clearly hear some people shouting from the direction of the store. Roland was quick to move towards all of the noise to check it out. When he arrived he was surprised to see the 4 adventurers back. They weren't the only ones, as other adventurer types were outside the store making a buzz. "Hey, stop pushing, we were here first." "No one cares about that, now move to the side, I need a new magic axe." The store had a limit to how many people could be inside. This made the half-orc guard have to intervene and keep people from pushing themselves inside. It looked like the word about his shop was being spread faster than he anticipated and he was already looking at some nice profits. "Did I lower the prices too much?" Roland contemplated as he saw the ravenous customers clamor for his wares. While the price was lowered to attract attention, it was not low enough for him to not make a profit. He shrugged while walking through the back into his store. While Elydia was a good and experienced worker, he would not leave her alone there. It was finally time to make some money.